guys. Okay, you know what? Round of applause for myself. All right. I don't know why it was so difficult this time. Okay, now let me unmute the tab. All right, now it shouldn't be double audio. Let me turn one of my screens on. Okay, you should be able to see. You should be able to see me now. I should be able to hear you guys. Apologies for the delay. It's been a minute since I had to set this shit up, and for some reason it was selecting the wrong window. Whatever. Anyway, we're here. I'll fix some of the little details here as we go along. Welcome to the show, Adam Green. It's good to have you back.
Good to be here.
Welcome. Also, Pinesap, you've been on a couple times, but this is your debate night debut here.
I'm very excited to be here.
Very cool. I'm very excited as well. Now, you know, we're going to do a couple of intro statements, and then I think that we'll probably have an early question period or back and forth based on the intros, and then more of a free fall, how we do it usually on the Killstream. I may interject here and there, or if y'all are talking over each other, I may break it up or whatever, and we might have super chat questions and calls later on, but we'll see how everything goes. That's always subject. We will get the super chat questions in. We don't know about calls. We'll see how everything goes and if it's warranted or whatever. If people really want to, that's cool. But anyway, that's the setup. And since it's kind of your thesis, Mr. Green, here, I figured I would let you go first and kind of put your thoughts out there, and then he's gonna probably be attacking that, I would assume.
Sure, I'd be happy to, but I wanted to yield the beginning of my time to ask Pinesap if he could steel man what he thinks my views on Christianity are.
Yeah. As in like give kind of the perspective that you're coming from, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. So while I am not familiar with all of your body of work, I was watching some stuff in the gym and yesterday and what have you. And it seems to me, by my understanding of your work, that you believe that Christianity is essentially I know this is sophomoric, but like a Jewish psyop to essentially co-opt Gentiles into believing in a religion that is not true and is just a way for Jewish people to like forward their own power or their own prestige or what have you in the world and their own interests, to the exclusion of like the gods and the cultures and the ways of life of the Gentiles or non-Jews. And you use you essentially bring up the fact that you don't believe that the dating of the gospel proves its authenticity, that you see some inconsistency or what you perceive to be inconsistencies or what have you, that invalidate Christianity as being true and essentially support this thesis that Christianity is somehow a Jewish hoax. Did I get that correct? Did I leave anything out?
Oh, you left some stuff out, but that's a good summary, basically, of where I'm coming from. Yeah, so in a nutshell, the way I see Christianity is that it's a deception. It's not real because Judaism's not real. It's a mythical book. Some truth scattered in there for the most part, embellish, exaggeration, completely manufactured. But basically, the way I see Christianity is it is a deception because it's fake prophecy fulfillment. I don't think that the Gospels are historical documents. They are religious propaganda with the intention of creating converts and getting Gentiles to worship the God of Israel. That's the ultimate goal in Judaism and in the Torah, to get all of the nations to abandon their idol worship and worship the God of Israel and his chosen people, and acknowledge the prestige, as you put it, of God's chosen people, and to get them to worship the Hebrew Torah Messiah, which the King of the Jews, and to be fearful, obedient, and put their hope in him, to consider themselves sheep following him, and basically to theologically subjugate the world. That's the ultimate agenda of Judaism, theological conquest. They ultimately want a one world religion, the nations worshiping their God. That's the conspiracy, and I don't see who could deny with that premise. Do you deny that premise?
I do deny that premise, and I think that based on the debates that I saw prior, where you were debating, say, classical theists or Miles, or I didn't get a chance to check out that one gentleman whose name starts with the T, that I'm losing the name, but I think that they did a pretty good job vindicating Christianity. Now, there are some inconsistencies. As much as this is a debate, I like to see this more as a dialogue, because I don't see you, even though we may be theological opponents, I don't see you as my enemy, Adam, by any means. I think that, as much as you might roll your eyes saying this, I think that God made you a strong young man, and that he formed you in his image, and that he loves you very, very much. I hope to reflect that love during our discussion. And I think some of the difficulties that you were maybe bringing up, like, let's say during your debate with Miles, was while he did a good job, I think there were difficulties in his own position from the standpoint of, say, like epistemology, like how do we know, that God's word has remained true, right? Because, I mean, for instance, Miles is a Lutheran, right? And so he believes that the Catholic Church defected maybe sometime, maybe way prior, but at least by the definitive date that Luther created his heresy, right? And so for him, he is operating off of an epistemology that says, okay, well, the larger body of Christians are just those who believe. And so it is easier to kind of ask the question, like, how do we know God's word? How do we know that it's like preserved and stuff like that? And I think it was one of kind of the blind spots of that side of the debate.
Okay. So, if I'm still in my opening statement, I don't know, to follow up on another point. Also, I see a big problem with the fact that the earliest Christian documents that mention Jesus come from Saul the Pharisee, who never knew Jesus, and very clearly says that he learned about Jesus just from the scriptures and from revelation. So I see this as typical ancient Jewish midrash pesher type of logic, connecting different verses, coming up with a new fan fiction myth, fake fulfillment of the prophecies. It's easy to fulfill prophecies of the Messiah if you're looking at all of those prophecies and then combining them to create a new myth, which is what Paul was doing almost in a proto-Kabbalistic way, where they are giving esoteric, mystical readings on these things and then combining them. And then very clearly, like Mark, the first gospel, which is 40 years after the supposed death of Jesus, he starts off by saying, as the prophet said, there'd be an Elijah figure, and that's John the Baptist. And all throughout Mark, and then all throughout Matthew and Luke that copied Mark, they say, and this and this and this happened so the scriptures would be fulfilled. And then Jesus said this so that the scriptures would be fulfilled. And as the prophet said, this happened. It's very clear that they're just writing up a new myth, a new mythology, selling it to the Gentiles that all these prophecies are fulfilled, to trick the Gentiles into the idea that the Jews really are chosen and they really are the nation of prophets and priests, and that their God really is the one true God of the universe. So it's a simple trick and a simple idea. Is it more likely that some ancient Jews came up with some myths and forgeries and lies, or that all of these, miraculous things happened and then nobody else ever wrote about them in contemporary times? And I don't see how anybody can say it's more likely that all of these magical things happen, all these miracles, all these laws of nature broken, instead of just saying the much more obvious explanation that some ancient Jews just made it up. We know that there were myth makers back then. We know that people lie and make up stuff all the time to advance their political or religious agenda, and that's what Christianity is.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Is it my turn now to do
yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking, go ahead.
Okay with Ralph.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of informal here, so I let him ask a question. Technically, I should have stopped him really, but asking a question. But I thought it was good for the discussion, so I just let him go. And there's no real hard and firm rules here, anyway. But go ahead, because I know you.
I wasn't also.
Yeah, no.
Going to end. I was just listening to just
sure.
make sure.
I imagine you probably prepared some kind of opening here too, so I wanted to let you get that in. So, go ahead.
Yeah, so essentially the position that I'm operating from is the Catholic position, so the true Christian position. And it comes from the standpoint that I don't think that the Gospels and the New Testament or really the Old Testament are necessarily Jewish fables and fairy tales that are essentially designed to control the Gentiles from a multitude of different standpoints. I think that the dating of the Gospels makes sense and proves their authenticity. I think that the extra biblical evidence that we do have to prove their veracity and their truth is excellent and pristine, even by people who are otherwise very critical of Christianity. I would also say too that in terms of a more not so much proving Jesus's historicity, our Lord's historicity, but and more so even just a way of, is Catholicism a way to get the Gentile to bend the knee to the Jews? I think history and even modern Catholic history proves that to not be true in the slightest, based on the various sort of medieval, the disputations that went on of Paris, Barcelona, and I know there was one more, Saratoga, and the very, frankly, antagonistic history that essentially Jews and Catholics have had with one another due to the fact of the former's rejection of the latter, right? I'm reminded of a very famous quote from unfortunately, the famous pornographer Al Goldstein, who cited in his autobiography that his whole impetus for essentially starting the hardcore pornography industry in America and bringing it to America was because he hated Christ and he hated specifically Christianity, and even more specifically because he hated the Catholic Church. And so I think that kind of antagonism and that kind of animosity, just from a facile standpoint, shows that there's clearly no, puppet master. We're trying to, do this 4D chess with the Gentiles to try and convince them into believing a bunch of fairy tales. And I would say that's my basic position operating in this debate.
So just to clarify, you said that something along the lines as I think that Christianity makes Christians bend the knee to Jews. That's not exactly right. Christians do elevate Jews to a divine status, believing that they are God's chosen people. Even if they only used to be God's chosen people, that's still putting them that's acknowledging their covenant, which is like the biggest thing in the world for them. And it's not about bending the knees to the Jews, not at first at least. It's about believing in the God of Israel. That's the ultimate goal, worshiping the God of Israel and following the Messiah, which is the King of the Jews. Do you agree with that Jesus is the King of the Jews?
I think he's the King of the Jews. I think he's the King of the Gentiles. I think he's the King of everything. He was
the King of the Jews first, right?
I wouldn't say first. I would say he's the king.
First to the Jew and then the Gentile. The Gentiles are getting the scraps from the table like dogs.
No. I think you're confusing that verse. So that verse, a lot of the church fathers write about this because we understand Revelation is contained, and you would know this based on the understanding of, the transmission of oral law, right? That there's a written law and then there's an oral law. So a lot of the church fathers write that when Jesus is speaking to the Canaanite woman and he's, essentially saying like, why do you why am I going to, answer your prayers and stuff like that? And she's saying like, even the dog essentially needs scraps. He's actually using it as a means to test her faith. I mean, Jesus straight up in his interaction with the centurion whose slave that he healed said, in all of Israel, I haven't found faith such as this, right? So he loved the Gentiles. Even in the Old Testament, man, I can pull up some verses, but even in the Old Testament, because I think what you're kind of struggling with, Adam, a little bit is what I call sort of the chicken and or what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? So there's this idea, the way that I think you're seeing it is you're seeing, okay, God of the Jews takes over the whole world because it's the God of the Jews. Whereas the understanding and the truth is that the reason why the Jews had this covenant was they were the only people who were faithful to God. The rest of the world fell away, right? But in God redeeming the world, so much of the world that had fallen away came back as the prodigal son to worship and adore God. And the tragedy is that the people who should have stayed faithful to God and should have stayed faithful to that covenant fell away. And that's the drama that we're living out in this day.
Yeah, a Jewish drama has been playing out for the last 2,000 years. If Jesus is the king of the Jews, he was first to the Jews, then the Gentiles. If they didn't reject him according to God's plan, the Gentiles would have never had salvation. They would have never had their blood sacrifice atonement. So they're almost the unsung heroes of the story, carrying out God's divine plan. And if it weren't for their disobedience, you would not be saved. So it's almost a good thing for you. My question is, what do you think was the role of the Messiah in Judaism, before Christianity? What was the role of the Messiah? What did they want the Messiah for?
The role of the Messiah is essentially to reconcile the whole world with himself, right? Because God is goodness. God is the source of all goodness, but because he is his parts, right? So if we say God is just, it's not that he, like any other being, like if I say, Adam, you're just, or I'm just, he is justice himself, or he is goodness himself. He wants to reconcile all of humanity with justice and goodness. And he said something very interesting there. He said this idea of, well, if the Jews hadn't rejected God, right, then the Gentiles would kind of be like, okay, you're dogs, like whatever. But the whole idea of that the prophet Isaiah lays out, right, which he was Jewish, he didn't live in the time of Jesus. He lays out this idea that, one of the signs of the Messiah's coming is that he will reconcile both Jew and Gentile, that it's about bringing everyone into this covenant. It's not that, the Gentiles are like, you choose the second best person for the baseball team when you can't get the first. It's that God always loved the Gentiles and was very sorrowful that many of the Gentiles did not believe, and so brought the Messiah as a means so that they may believe.
God doesn't always like the Gentiles. In the Old Testament, he calls the nations like nothing, and they're all inferior and second-class citizens compared to his chosen people. And I would argue that the purpose of the Messiah is to get the Gentiles to worship in him, yes, but I wouldn't call that a reconciliation. I would call that subjugation. We see verses like Psalm 110, where this is messianic. Christians will agree that this verse is about the Messiah. It says, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. And then it says, the Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. He will judge the nations. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So this is definitely where they picked up the Jesus idea from. So from the Jewish perspective, who is the enemies that the Messiah is going to make his footstools? And who are the enemies in the land that the Messiah is ruling, if not the Gentiles?
Well, ultimately, the enemy is sin itself, right? There's this whole idea that Christ, when he came to wash the world away from sin, and that no man ultimately is the cause or source of sin, but it's the devil himself. The devil is...
That's not what this... Sorry to interrupt, but that's just not what this verse is about at all. It says, he will judge the nations, crushing the rulers of the whole earth. Crush the kings on his day of wrath. This is about conquering the Gentile kingdoms. The Messiah conquering the Gentile kingdoms. Jesus is a rewritten archetype of Joseph, who was sold by his brothers, his 12 brothers, for being Jacob's favorite. He was sold by Judas. He goes and rules through his power of interpreting dreams. He raises up and rules behind the throne in Egypt. And then his brothers come. They don't recognize him, but then eventually they bow down in front of him. And the Pharaoh says that your family can get the milk of the land, the best lands and riches and stuff. So that's the idea, is Jesus is Joseph ruling in the land of thine enemies, theologically subjugating and conquering the nations. That's the whole purpose of the Messiah. That's the whole purpose of Yahweh. That's the whole purpose of God's chosen people, his nation of priests. Why would Gentiles want to worship a Messiah of a supremacist chosen people, self-chosen people? Why would they want to worship a Messiah who was meant to conquer them?
Because again, you're not reading biblical literature with the kind of allegory in which it's written, right? There's a psalm that talks about bashing babies' heads against rocks, right? But it's not telling you that you as a commandment to go out and take a baby and bash it against a rock. Largely, tradition dictates that it actually refers to like evil thoughts, right? Like evil thoughts that enter your head that are these like little, essentially like babies, right? These like little thoughts that are, are weak and ultimately like futile.
That's really reaching.
I don't think that's reaching in the slightest.
Traditions will have some nice fluffy explanation for such horrendous things that are in there, but they're commanded to completely destroy the Amalekites, which is anybody that stands in the way of the Judeo plan. So it's not that I'm not reading it allegorically. It's every time you look in the New Testament and you see the scriptures being referenced or cited or being fulfilled, you go back to the Old Testament, read the context of that chapter, and every time it's about conquering the nations. It's about the kings on the ground licking the dust in front of the Messiah. It's about making the footstool, ruling in the land of thine enemies, reigning over the Gentiles. All in Romans 15 literally says that Jesus, according to the prophet Isaiah, is here to reign over the Gentiles, reign over the Goyim.
And the Jews.
Well, it was their Messiah to begin with. They wanted him to begin with. The real deception is getting it all over the whole world. And Christianity spread the Torah, the God of Israel, and Torah messianism all over the whole world. This is what the Jews wanted with the whole world to do these things. They did it for them. And top rabbis in Judaism, the consensus view in Orthodox Judaism says that this was according to prophecy, according to God's plan. It's preparing the world for the Messianic age, the one world government, one world religion, the prophecies fulfilled. And maybe Christianity's not about bowing down to Jews back then, although it is bowing down to the God of Israel and the Messiah. But what do you think of Zechariah 8, where it says, and many peoples and powerful nations will come to Jerusalem to seek the Lord Almighty. This is what the Lord Almighty says. In those days, 10 people from all languages and nations will take firm hold of one Jew by the hem of his robe and say, let's go with you because we have heard that the God is with you. At what point are all the Gentiles, all the Goyim, going to grab onto the tassel of the Jew's shirt and say, we heard God is with you, and follow them?
Again, it's misunderstanding biblical literature, and I'll explain why. So in the New Testament, of course, in the New Testament, you have this antipathy towards the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all these Jewish groups that would be the Jewish elders passing on this tradition of the inferiority of the Gentiles and the hatred of the Gentiles, and the Gentiles are unclean and unwashed and what have you. And part of what scandalizes them is that Jesus reaches out to these people because he loves the Gentiles. He doesn't hate the Gentiles. And again, the whole conquering of the nation or conquering of our hearts is not in a means of, God, I'm going to worship you because, just the Jews are divine or something like that, right? It's a whole chicken. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier about the chicken and the egg. Why does God in the Old Testament talk about the Gentiles in a bad way? Well, he's not talking about like the people themselves as in like the flesh I made of the Gentiles is somehow evil. He's talking about the actions of the Gentiles being evil. And again, it's kind of a matter of what paradigm you're operating of, because the way you see it is, it's wrong that he sees, like, let's say the Norse worshiping Odin or something as wrong. Whereas God, again, who is goodness and truth, sees this false worship and he's saddened by it. He's like, these people I want reconciled with me. If the creator of the universe, who loved us so much that he would breathe life into my nostrils, sees me worshiping something that takes me away from him, what is more just and fatherly than wanting my love and wanting my admiration? If a father saw his son, let's say a father unfortunately had to give his son up for adoption or whatever, and this is not a perfect example that I'm giving, but let's say a father lost his son, right, when he was very, very young, and then he sees his son many years later and sees his son exclaiming that this man who kidnapped him is his father. Well, would he not be jealous? Would he say, no, that's my son. My son belongs to me. I love him and I care about him and I want to bring him back into my house, right? This whole idea, because again, this whole idea of like crushing or what have you is not, the Christians or sorry, the Gentiles, going and just, bowing down at the feet of Jews. It's this elevation that God brings to our life or our lives and giving us eternal life and saving us from sin. That's the whole thing. That's what's being conquered, right?
All right, go ahead, Adam.
No, I think it's incredibly dangerous and enabling to reread these verses that are clearly about conquering the nations and say, well, traditions say that's just about conquering the mind. It's almost like you're an apologist for Jewish supremacy, because
why am I rereading it though? If Jesus disdained the people who read it in that way of saying the Gentiles are dirty goyim and cattle and we hate them and we're scandalized by you who is reaching out to them and loving them.
I don't consider, and I'm not seeing any of the reaching out and loving at all. That you're reading that into it. But how I see Christians, what I see you doing here with your analysis of the Torah is you Christians have to be apologists for the Torah. So you can't condemn all of the blueprint for the Torah, which is for, a global enslavement, a global dictatorship from the Davidic Messiah ran out of Jerusalem. And you say, oh, we're not bowing down to Jews, but you do believe every knee will bow and every tongue will confess to the King of the Jews, to the God of Israel, which is the Jewish God. You believe the Hebrew Torah is the infallible word of God. So you do worship Jews. And the vast majority of Christians believe you're cursed if you curse them and blessed if you bless them. All of our Christian political leaders are going over and bowing down to a wall and saying, you're God's chosen people and your land is the holy land. And Christianity enables all of this by defending it, going along with it, playing into it, and codependence, perpetuating the problem of Jewish power. And if it weren't for Christianity, there would be no Christian Zionism, and Judaism wouldn't have the power and the influence over the world today if it weren't for all the Christians believing in these fairy tales.
Okay, but there's a couple problems with what you said. First of all, I'm not arguing for evangelicals who go to Israel and worship Israel and kiss the dust of Israel and say that we have to, with blood and on blood and soil, defend Israel. I'm defending the only true Church of Christ, which is the Catholic Church. Now, again, I know that you might point to certain popes who have said positive things about the Jewish people or whatever. Yeah, that's because we're not, out here being like, race war now, we need to kill all Jews or something like that. That's not our attitude, right? But there's always been a recognition in the tragedy from every pope up to Pope Francis, right? And the whole church of the tragedy that the Jews do not accept Christ as their Messiah. And you also said that I was reading in Jesus's love for the Gentiles when very clearly I'm not, right? I mean, how is it that St. Paul goes to the, to the Greeks and he sees them worshiping this idol and he's saddened by this. And he's like, I want to bring the gospel to these people, not so they'll kiss my feet or they'll worship me or they'll bow to me, but so that I might bring them eternal life. How is it that Jesus, when healing the centurion's slave, exclaims his faith so much that he says, you're better and more faithful than even the people in my own native Israel?
Because under the theory, Paul,
one at a time.
All the Jews rejecting him.
All right, now go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Because Christianity was always a religion for the Gentiles. They wanted the nations to worship the God of Israel without becoming Jewish, so they had to create another religion that's still essentially Noahide compliant. Even in Acts, it lists off a few of the Noahide laws, and it says, Jerusalem church says, Paul, you go be the apostle to the Gentiles. The story about the centurion having the best faith is because they wanted the Romans to have faith in Jesus, because that was the takeover plan. They couldn't beat them on the battlefield. They couldn't defeat the giant Roman Empire. So they had to resort to religious propaganda and religious warfare, essentially theological warfare. And that's what happened. And then the Roman Empire went from persecuting Judaism and then Christianity to outlawing paganism and imposing Christianity on the world. And then now we have the Torah spread all over the world, the Jews saying this is all according to the plan. Christianity doesn't persecute them as it did in the past, giving them their victim status. Instead, it's repenting. It's turned into their greatest advocate, and Israel's a rising power, and they're working together, Abraham Accords, to play out the rest of their prophecies. I just don't see how you cannot see that this is the big picture, that you're worshiping the Jewish God as they always wanted, the Messiah that was meant to conquer all of the world, and you're willingly worshiping this figure.
So one of the first church councils and one of the first things said by the apostles is that I don't need to keep Jewish dietary law and I don't need to be circumcised to be saved. And then on top of that the early Christians are defined by being thrown out of temples, that they're rejected, that they're despised, the Jews hate them, that they're actively persecuted. You know, Simon Bar Kokhba literally like cutting Christians' throats and killing even Jewish converts to Christianity and what have you. That doesn't make any sense. That I mean, I guess I'm just a dumb goy because that seems to be such 4D chess that I'm not even seeing the through the holes in this plot, right? I mean, how is it also too, if the whole main architecture plan is for me to be bowing the knee to Jews, how would it make any sense that St. Louis IX, one of his defining acts during his reign as King of France, was burning 21 cartfuls of Talmuds in Paris, right? And saying that you can't reprint the Talmud, that it's blasphemous, it's evil, that Pablo Cristiani, one of the first things he does when he converts to Christianity is he goes to Pope Gregory IX and he says, hey, Pope Gregory, do you know what's contained in the Talmud? And Pope Gregory is like, no, I don't. Isn't it just like dietary law and stuff? And he's like, no, they literally say that Mary, the Holy Theotokos, was a whore who slept with a Roman guard to conceive Jesus, who is then stoned to death and is now burning in semen and excrement. There's so many holes in that plot that it's like there's no consistency with that. You know what I mean?
No, there is. You just haven't watched enough of my videos to see that I've explained all those things ad nauseum. Number one, the whole idea that circumcision and kosher law are not required for the Gentiles' Christianity. Gentiles aren't supposed to follow the Jewish commandments. Those are only for the covenant with his special chosen people.
Neither Jewish converts to Catholicism, though. In fact, it's actually a sin to get circumcised as if you're of Jewish heritage and you convert to Catholicism and you say, if I'm circumcised, I'm saved. That's actually a sin. That's a false right.
That's because that's what became Orthodox Christianity. That's the perspective. But I'm saying from Paul's perspective, he was saying Gentiles don't need to become Jews and follow the Torah commandments because they didn't want them to. Gentiles aren't supposed to keep the Sabbath and keep kosher and be circumcised. That's what differentiates the chosen from the non-chosen. So that's explained. Also, you go, oh, well, Christianity's anti-Jewish because they burn the Talmud. If they were anti-Jewish, they would be burning the Torah because the Torah is the root of the supremacist agenda. The Talmud is just commentaries on the Mishnah, which is commentaries in the oral law on the Torah. So they don't do that. This is the limited hangout that Christianity is. Only the Talmud's the problem. And the big issue with the Talmud, the big grievance is it says that Jesus is boiling in excrement and that Jesus' mother is a whore. That's the big problem. Not all the other stuff. So it's the Christians got their panties in a bunch because they're rejecting their Messiah. They're mocking our Messiah. That just turns Christians into the villains of history and is given the Jews their victim status, which fulfills their prophecies and has ultimately benefited their plan. Look at where they're at today. Christianity eradicated pagan cultures all over the West and the world. But somehow Christianity was preserved and Christianity ensured the preservation of Judaism because they need to be around at the end time and they have a special role and they're kind of the vestigial elder brothers in faith, the kind of shows of the Old Testament that goes along. They need each other. Christians and Jews are inextricably linked. Jews may be the villains in the Christian story, but they're also central to their story. In Christianity represents Esau, which is all about persecuting them for the dumbest reasons that makes us lose our moral high ground, turns us into the villains, and has given them their victim status that they've weaponized today.
All right, Pinesap, go ahead. Are Jews the Joker to Christianity's Batman? Which I just came up with that by myself, by the way. But I was like, hold on, it's kind of like Batman and the Joker then, right? Like, anyway.
And also, that's a good analogy. And also, from the Judaism's perspective, Christianity is like the satanic evil twin brother that represents Esau to their Jacob.
All right, go ahead, Pinesap.
Well, that's fine if they see us that way, but again, that's not what the religion or our faith proclaims, right? So we do understand that there's this prophecy of eventually all of the Jewish people returning to the fold, but as to accept Jesus, right? So it seems a little counterintuitive that, again, they would reject this Messiah that came to save them, and that's some like, again, 4D chess for us to bend the knee to the God of Israel to be their slaves. How are we being our slaves? How are we being our slaves? How are we being their slaves by doing that? Because again, Jewish opposition to Christianity doesn't make any sense in terms of being this larger power play. You know, you talk about like this whole idea from the Torah, like, you know, conquering the nations and crush the nations and what have you. But again, that's the same Old Testament that, you know, wants the Gentiles to be reconciled with Jews and for there to be a great peace to exist, right? You know, and half of this kind of like rabbinic disdain for, you know, Christians or actually, I lost my train of thought there. You know, essentially like this whole idea that it's this master play for us to be Esau so that we might persecute Jacob by, say, like burning the Talmud or something like that, again, doesn't make sense. Like the Talmudic oral law comes even much later, or a lot of it does. Some of it did exist prior, but comes much later after, you know, the ascent of our Lord Jesus into heaven, right? It's a revisionist oral law that they wrote up later, right, to try and purport their claims to, you know, us persecuting them and you know, them being, you know, we was chosen and what have you, right? Now we understand that there's this special dynamic, this special play, this drama of, you know, why is it that essentially the Jews are not accepting the Messiah who came to save them and the Gentiles, might I reaffirm, right? And that's been the central conflict that's played out.
It does say that the Jews will look upon the one who was pierced in the end, but it also says in Revelation that Christians will be beheaded for the testimony of Jesus. And I think in Luke and other Gospels, it says that the Christians will be persecuted and flogged and beaten in the synagogues. So yes. Is that your idea of winning?
Yes, because of the fact that we would be persecuted for the sake of our faith in Jesus Christ. Not that we would be like blood offerings for the Jews, man. Like there's
you're a Christian
for that.
You believe that Christians are to be persecuted. God wants Christians to be persecuted, but Jews would never create a religion that persecutes them. Even though they're the suffering servant, their religion is based upon atonement and purifying their souls and redemption and the nations hating them.
The whole understanding of why Christians would suffer in this world corresponds to how our Lord suffered, right? So our Lord suffered humiliation and shame and was not crowned. You know, I mean, one of the central motifs of the crucifixion is that Jesus, rather than being given a crown of gold like he should have been, was given a crown of thorns. He was hated and disdained. And so Jesus too tells us, you will be hated and disdained for my sake. Again, no.
And that's a win. To be humiliated and
go to heaven, man. We get to be reconciled with God forever.
That's the promise. That's the false promise that in the afterlife you'll get your rewards. Trust the plan, go. As long as you believe in the power of the magical Jewish prophecies and the Yom Kippur atonement sacrifice of the King of the Jews, you'll be rewarded in the end as long as you believe us. Like that's kind of the way I hear that.
Meanwhile, while Jews would be damned for not accepting Christ,
everybody would be damned for not accepting Christ. right?
Jacuzzi sent
Well,
$5.
anyone who
Thank
does it-
you
well,
for doing the
of course-
debate.
So God
You're
wants to
adamant,
damn
Pinesap.
people to
It's
hell if
always
they don't
great to
believe
see
in the
two
power
Western
of
men
Jewish
battle it
prophets
out for our
and of the
education
power of
and
being washed
entertainment.
in the blood
07.
in a blood magic scapegoat atonement ritual. And that's love.
It's love because of this statement, okay? Original sin, right? We have this idea of we have this idea essentially of God makes this perfect, you know, not society, but this perfect you could say environment, right? This perfect place for man, right? To rejoice, to walk with him, to be in happiness forever. Part of his gift to us is that we're given free will. And so like God, that's what's said when we're made in the image of God, right? Like our souls, we have rational souls, like God has rationality because God is reason. He's the source of all reason, right? And so we have a capacity to choose either good or evil. We chose evil and we chose to condemn ourselves to the earth. Now, it is said oftentimes that one of the central dramas of the Garden of Eden is that had Adam and Eve eaten of the apple and regretted what they had done and gone to God and said, God, we disobeyed you. Like we completely, you know, discouraged your name. We didn't follow you. God most certainly would have forgiven them. But what did they do? They hid. And so God said, well, you live with the consequences of what you did, because this is a place of all goodness. I am all goodness. And you know, evil cannot coexist with good, right? It's basic teleology in the sense of like God, or you know, essentially, you know, light cannot exist with darkness, right? Both are contradictions of each other. And so if evil's to exist in the Garden of Eden, well, then the Garden of Eden's no longer good, right? It no longer becomes good when, you know, a corrupted man who chose, again, sin over God is existing there. And so we you know, had to suffer our consequences. However, God in his mercy and providence says, you know, you can be reconciled with me. You can be brought back up to paradise with me, and I will send a redeemer for your sake. You know, the way I like to think about it in kind of maybe allegory, I always forget the definition of allegory, but in an allegorical sense is if my father tells me, Pinesap, you know you've got these outstanding student loans and I will pay for them if you just come see me and you're with me. But if I just keep telling my father, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to see you. And my student loans don't get paid, right? And I have that debt. Well, whose fault really is that? That's my fault. That's not God's
Adam,
fault.
You'd
God's open. God's arms are
God
open to every single human being,
and
right?
has promised us a glorious eternity.
All right, go ahead, and then I got a couple super chats, and send them in if you want some questions asked or answered or however you want to put it, and I'll read them all out. I kind of just been letting it go because it's been really good so far. Go ahead, Adam, and then I'll read those.
How could you say that God doesn't, that he loves the Gentiles and this is a religion of love? Just let me read you a few verses from one of your prophets, Isaiah. Isaiah 60 says, "For the nation or kingdom that will not serve you will perish. It will be utterly ruined." And then Isaiah 60:16, "Thou shalt also suck the milk of the goyim," that's the suck the milk of the nations, "shalt suck the breast of kings, and thou shalt know that I, Jehovah, am thy Savior and thy Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob." That's important. Also in Isaiah 61, the next chapter, "You will feed on the wealth of the nations." This is the God that Christians are willingly worshiping, one that says that they're going to be there. Jesus came only for the lost sheep of Israel. He compares Gentiles to dogs getting the scraps of the table. And then the New Testament is based on the Old Testament that just has verse after verse everywhere about the glory of God's chosen people and how evil the Gentiles are. Does none of that like ring a bell at all? Can you just like, what's your response?
I was just reading to make sure I had the relevant verses. But I mean, it's one of those things where, again, like, there's this idea in Isaiah of the reconciliation taking place, right? So that
for the Jews.
for the Jews and the Gentiles. That's one of the central themes of it, right? That's one of the central themes of the entire book, is this idea of Jew and Gentile being reconciled. Not, again, that Jews would have the whipping hand over the Gentiles, right?
Do you feel lucky to be, I don't want to be reconciled with some supremacists from the Middle East that think their destiny is to rule over the whole world. Why would you want to be reconciled with
People
that?
grow $3
Because the
per
Jew
Adam.
who converts
Can
to
Adam give some
Christianity doesn't
examples of
believe that
non-Christian
anymore.
pushback? Thinking movements here.
No, I'm talking about
against
before
Judaism?
Christianity. This is what they viewed. Why would you want to reconcile with a group of supremacists that want to rule the world according to their religion with their Messiah? Why would you want to worship that Messiah?
Before Christianity existed, that was the same theme, this idea of the reconciliation. It's not that Christianity came along and retconned all of it. There was this reconciliation prophesized before. That's one of the central themes of Isaiah, is this idea that, again, one day the Gentiles will be reconciled. In fact, I do want to pull up.
Were the ancient Jews before Christianity, did they want to be reconciled to the Romans and the Greeks, or did they want a messianic leader to come and crush them?
Well, one of the
impose the God of Israel on the world.
One of the whole scandals that Jesus brought is that he was not a military leader that had the blood of the Gentiles on his hands, but that he came to redeem both Jew and Gentile from sin. That's what the Pharisees were really pissed off about, because they're like, you're supposed to like kill and crush the Romans. And it's like, here you are talking with Pontius Pilate and, again, healing the centurion slave. And there's, this Canaanite woman following you, right? That's
but Jesus did conquer the Romans. But Jesus did conquer the Romans after all.
He conquered the Romans through love, not through any sort of blood. Not through killing them, not through anything like that. The conquering going on is referring to the idea of conquering one's heart, not through this, magic psyop or something.
Paganism for love. They made Christianity in 3rd and 4th century. They made Christianity the only state religion allowed out of love. That's not love.
It is love.
Forcing the Jewish God and the Jewish Messiah on other Gentiles is love.
St. Theodosius the right-believing, when he imposed...
I guess the rabbis love me when they want me to bow and serve them and bow before their Moshiach. I guess that's just love.
Okay, let me give you an example right here, because this comes from St. Thomas. So if I have a bottle of poison right here and I see you drinking it, and let's say I slap it out of your hand, well, you're not happy that I just slapped something out of your hand, but you were drinking poison. Does it then not make sense that if something takes you from eternal life, that you would not want it corrupting other people?
Muslims,
that makes complete sense to me, right? Why, like, if I know those people promoting idol worship and having like temple prostitutes and all those kinds of things means that their soul is going to heaven forever, you damn well believe, yeah, I'm going to crush their temples. I'm going to destroy the evil that I see going on there. That's sad. Not because I hate those people, but because I don't want them to persist in that.
So you're poisoned was the word you used, unless you worship the God of the Jews and the God of Zion.
Unless you worship the God of all of mankind, that for a long time
it chose the Jews. It was the tribal God of the Jews first.
Listen, one of the central understandings of the Old Testament is there was a time when all men knew God and they fell away. And we can even see this in like certain historiography, right? Like, how is it that all, or well, not necessarily all, but a lot of religions across the world, like even in Aztec culture and even in like Polynesian culture, have a story of a great flood taking everything away, washing everything away, and making the world anew? That's like that's an ancestral like memory, right? That's an ancestral memory of Moses. Right?
People could have local floods and then just come up with a myth that it happened all over the world. Also, the flood myth in the Bible was preceded by, wasn't it Gilgamesh had a story of a flood as well? There was no worldwide flood. Noah's Ark is clearly a fictional story.
Well, while I'm not here to debate Noah's Ark, I could find the relevant information that would dispute that. But I haven't done my research in that area.
If you weren't a Christian, you would without skipping a beat say, yeah, Noah's Ark, obvious fairy tale.
Well, if I'm not a Christian, I'm not going to believe the claims of Christianity, because then I would be a Christian. Like, that's the whole that's the whole ridiculousness of Jewish mythicism, Jewish mythicism, Jesus mythicism. It's like, people, it's like wanting to have your cake and eat it too. It's like, okay, well, because Tacitus doesn't say that, Jesus resurrected and that he performed all these miracles, then therefore it didn't happen. Well, if Tacitus said that, then he would be a Christian. Then he would believe in God, because he clearly saw God work his power, work his miracles, and then said, fall on his knees and believe, right? Even Josephus, like, we understand that there were those later interpolations that Christians wrote in, but, scholars, in finding the original extract of what he says, understand that, like, Josephus, acknowledged that this was a claim that Christians made, right? That there was this resurrection, or rather that, there was this group of Christians and he suffered under Pontius Pilate and what have you, right? But if he said he believed it and he believed that all those things happened, well, he'd no longer be an unbelieving Jew. He would be a Christian.
Yeah, but that's not the point that I was trying to make. I was saying that the only reason that anybody would believe in these obviously fictional stories like Noah's Ark or staffs turning to snakes or what have you is if you're already, like, either raised into religion, you're indoctrinated as a child, or it's some type of crutch, emotional reason it's appealing to you. But anybody, I don't want to say that. Ralph, you can go ahead, and then
I'll read these. And also, the TTS was playing. I couldn't hear it, and y'all couldn't hear it, but they could hear it. So I did stop that. I don't know how that happened, but OBS has a mind of its own. I think I got it under control now, but I guess some of them did play, but I'll read them again anyway, because that wasn't the idea. Okay, let me refresh these. PowerChat.live/TheRalphRetort, the Transformer Fund on the screen. Now let me read a couple. Grugman said, let's go, right at the beginning of this. Jacuzzi said, thank you for doing the debate here, Adam and Pinesap. It's always great to see two Western men battle it out for our education and entertainment. Ed says, Adam, you'd sacrifice anything for your kid. God feels the same way about his children and has promised us a glorious eternity. What would you say to that?
I wouldn't kill my dog to forgive a sin that my daughter committed. I'll tell you that.
Are you talking about Jesus being crucified?
I'm talking about the whole idea of Jesus as the scapegoat, Jesus as the Passover lamb, the idea of animal sacrifice, burnt offerings. If my daughter did something bad, I wouldn't kill my dog to forgive her. That's like an allegory for what's happening.
Well, I actually wanted to answer that because I heard you kind of bring that up in prior debates, and I wanted to and Adam, by the way, I'm sorry if I'm getting frustrated or something. I don't do many debates, so if I seem like cross with you or something, no hate in my heart for you at all, brother. I just wanted to clarify that. But one of the scandals of the incarnation, actually, that we oftentimes say is the fact that, like, Jesus didn't have to, do any of that, in the sense of he didn't need to come in the flesh of a man. He didn't need to suffer for our sake. He could have come down and he could have just, been completely fine, lived a lavish life, been adorned as a king. But one of the main scandal of the incarnation is, why would Jesus come down, be incarnate in the flesh, suffer humiliation, be rejected, be hated, be disdained, spit upon, whipped, finally crucified and killed by people he loves so much? Well, it's because of the infinite nature of his love. The fact that God comes down to meet us, right? Unlike in any pagan mythos where it's like, Zeus will kill me if I don't, harvest 3 berries on the midsummer night, right? But this idea that Jesus came down to meet us, that he did not need to do any of this, and he came down in our flesh and suffered for our sake, experiencing pains and humiliations not just like us, but even worse, so that he could love us. That's infinite love. And the reason we can't understand that, really to its fullness, is because none of us could have that same love. Like, I'm selfish, right? I have a hard time loving people who cut me off in the grocery store, or, I'm on the road and they pass over me or what have you. I have a hard time loving those people. I can't imagine loving people who are spitting and cursing at me and mocking me and telling me I'm all these kinds of things that I'm not. And that's the whole thing about the incarnation, is that Jesus, didn't have to come in the flesh of a man, but he did because he loves you, man. Like, that's the heart of it. That's the heart of the gospel message, is like everything that God does. And I know it's hard for you to believe, but everything that God does is for love.
All right, go ahead, Adam, respond. I'll get some more of these in.
Jesus didn't die for love. He died for the earliest idea was ransom atonement, to fix the debt to the devil from Adam and Eve. But the whole passion narrative, all the gospels are, like I said, fake prophecy fulfillment. Paul very clearly, which his letters, his epistles come before the gospels. He says he never knew Jesus. He didn't go and speak with the apostles. He learned it from scripture and revelation. He had mystical experiences or whatever came up with it, right? So that's where you get died and then crucified and then resurrected after 3 days. That was his basic gospel. But the whole passion narrative from the Jesus, Barabbas, and Pilate, this is known by biblical academics that this is a retelling of Yom Kippur. All of it is inspired, quote mined, manufactured the new gospel myth from the scriptures. Like, he didn't open his mouth. Oh, that's a prophecy. They didn't break his bones. That's another prophecy. He was mocked and spit on. That's Isaiah 50, 53. They cast lots for his garments. You know, he said he thirst and then he drank the gall and the wine. All of these things are not Jesus on earth and everything's being fulfilled. They're writing it to fulfill the things. Can you admit that it's much more likely that you don't need any supernatural explanation to just say they wrote these myths from the prophecies?
No, I can't admit that, because if you see the cross references in scripture alone, the thousands, the hundreds, and the way that they interconnect, that's damn near impossible to do something like that. And especially have numerous manuscripts, from Mark to Matthew to Luke to John coincide so well at the same time. Let me give you an example of like,
hold on. There's so many contradictions between the gospels, especially between John.
Answered like 100 times, dude.
John and the synoptics. No, they haven't been answered.
Yeah, they have.
Not adequately. Maybe in a Christian's mind, they've been answered, but not to a discerning outsider.
I would press X to doubt on that one, brother. I've met plenty of former atheists that said that those kinds of contradictions being answered was actually what made them become Catholic, accept Christ into their lives. But, personal testimony aside, let me give you an example of like a fulfillment from the Old Testament, right? That's kind of like a lesser known proof, but it's not exactly the same of like the fulfillment of like Yom Kippur, right? So, there's this whole idea of like Mary being the Ark of the New Covenant. Like, she bears the word of God, like the Ark bared the word, right? That she's pure, she's stainless, she doesn't have this sin, just like the Ark of the Old Covenant, right? And this is such a like minor fulfillment that even Protestants sometimes have a hard time like accepting this. They're like, Mary was just an ordinary woman or what have you, right? But this is how deep the scripture goes. This is how deep that everything links and coincides with itself. It's not just simply, some mythos being spewed out about like, Buddha said that I'm just giving a random fake example, but like Buddha said that tree would, bear plums, and the second summer it did, it goes much deeper than that. The cross references alone. I mean, there's a meme I even saw about it recently where it's like, Pingu, and he's like doing the newt, and then it's like, you see these cross references and it's like, it looks like literally a not web, but like a weave, right? Like,
what's one of these cross references? Like, the brazen serpent being lifted up on the pole?
Let me find a good example. I think one of the cross references, there's
also a dispute. A lot of early Christians didn't even call it a cross. They called it a tree.
Oh, are you talking Oh, are you misunderstanding when I say cross references? Are you thinking that I'm talking about like?
Oh, you're saying cross.
the cross?
Yeah. Okay. I got you. I
No,
thought
no,
you were saying references to
I
the cross.
totally
Gotcha.
understand the confusion. That's totally
Yeah.
understandable. No, I was talking about like when you
That's funny.
cross-reference like a document or something.
I got it. Yeah, I
That
got
makes
it.
sense.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I would say that would be crazy for you to think, but we're talking about religion and Christianity, so it's like, okay, yeah, it does make sense. Cross references, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Hey,
I was talking about
Yeah.
prophecy being. I'm talking about the narrative of like the crucifixion coming from Scripture. So I thought
Right,
you were going to give me like
It
a
makes
prophecy
sense.
of the cross.
That actually
No,
makes sense.
I completely understand. It's an easy it's one of those kind of like funny like oh man, what's it called when like a word has like multiple different misunderstandings?
Is it an idiom?
Yeah, I think an idiom, right? It was kind of like an idiom moment. But no, I meant cross references as like a document is cross reference or like references back to something.
I got it. Yeah.
So like a good example is like in many of like the deuterocanonical books, there's certain like minor prophecies or certain minor things that are being fulfilled, right? I remember like one of the prophecies from Daniel, for instance, right, is that or I believe it's from Daniel if I'm not mistaken. Excuse me if I'm biblically illiterate here, but the Messiah will ride into Jerusalem on an ass, right? That's one. There's also minor ones, like, for instance, Catholic scholars oftentimes talk
And
about...
hold on, let me pause you right there, because that's a point I could have raised as well. Jesus said to his disciples, "Go and get a donkey or an ox that's an ass that's never been ridden before, so that the scriptures may be fulfilled." Like literally, the whole narrative is just like, and then this scripture there, and that scripture there.
Right.
That's what makes me say it's obvious that this is what they're doing. That they're making. It's like, when the Jesus myth was evolving from Paul and then to the Gospels and then later on, for them to learn about Jesus's life, they look to the Old Testament scriptures. And in fact, we know that they're doing this because the Greek Gospels and Paul's Greek letters, when they are supposedly speaking for Jesus, the red letters, they're quoting directly from the Greek Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Tanakh. This is proving that their source for the Jesus myth is from the Greek Septuagint and not from an Aramaic speaking eyewitness that saw Jesus actually say these things. This is one of the giveaways that this is what this is. It's a manufactured, contrived, fictional, almost proto-Kabbalistic story.
Well, that's where we would disagree. So I actually wanted to give more minor prophecies that were fulfilled that are very like so uncanny it's kind of real. So,
but do you understand that from my perspective, I'm not impressed by these prophecies, because from my view, I think that they had these prophecies. Ancient Jews, they're occupied by the Romans. They're scouring the scriptures for mysteries and revelations that they can decode about how their redemption and their Messiah is going to come. So they knew all of these things. So it's very easy for them to just write up a new story from all of the prophecies. That's why this isn't impressive to me. But go ahead. I do want to hear the ones you want to bring up.
So like one of the good examples is I remember, I believe it was either David or there's this idea of like I believe it's in Ezekiel and we call this like a typology, right? Like where the Old Testament goes to the New. There's this image of the king's steward having this binding and this loosing power, right? Like whatever you will, if you loosen this, it'll be loosened. If you bind, this will be bound. And then that corresponds again, of course, to the institution of the papacy, right? This idea of, Peter being given this charism by Christ to be able to bind and loose, and all the apostles having that in kind of a more minor way. But what's very interesting is there's even a more minor prophecy that actually, ironically, the Midrash kind of speaks about a little bit, where it's said, and I believe it's Isaiah where this is talked about, where God made Abraham a rock, right? That's like the tradition. It goes like God made Abraham the rock of his people, right? But it's also said that, Jesus makes Peter a rock, right? In the New Testament. And what's crazy about this connection is it not only goes back to the Old Testament, but it also is a like more minor proof of Jesus's divinity, right? Like only God could make someone a rock, right? Only he who is the true rock of everything could make someone else a rock by delegation. And so God, the Father, making Abraham a rock is a typology for then Jesus, true God, true man, making Peter a rock. That's just a minor example, and there's thousands of more examples and stuff like that. And forgive my biblical illiteracy and bringing them up, but that's
and also
very interesting.
Another way that you know that the Jesus story is just a retelling. He's like the new Moses, essentially. And this is like how the Pharaoh wanted to kill all the young boys to get rid of Moses. And then Herod wanted to do the slaughter of the innocents. And then Jesus had to go to Egypt. And then that's a prophecy also. Out of Egypt, I bring forth my son, or whatever it is. Can't remember the exact verse.
Right.
Again, it's all just, these aren't amazing. The difference between you and me is you believe in the power of Jewish prophecy and the Jewish God, and I don't. I see this as just a contrived, fabricated ancient Jewish script. They had part one, they saw where part one was going, and then they wrote part two. It's like as simple as that, and then sold it to the Gentiles.
Well, that's kind of amazing, though, that Jews who were largely disdained from the larger rabbinical community could drum up such typologies that would be fulfilled in such a deep way, like the one that I cited about, even the minor one of like God making Abraham a rock, right? And Jesus making Peter a rock. Like that's pretty minor. That's a very minor tradition. How is it that, again, like the rabbis of Jesus's day, who would have been probably even more well studied in the Torah, right, would have been more well studied in the law and the various oral traditions passed down, still managed to find it in their hearts to reject Jesus and not see him as any fulfillment of any of these, these prophecies. But then it's like these more, these Jews in sort of a lower standing in society, like, are crazily enough are like one of the best writers in all of history to be able to, reference this part of the Old Testament and that part. And, this fulfills that. And, Mary's the Ark of the New Covenant. And like, that's pretty, I mean, dang, I wish I had author skills like that. I mean, it's crazy.
It's impressive author skills. They're good storytellers. Aren't they known for being good storytellers?
Jews?
Yeah. Aren't they the script writers? Aren't they the movie producers? This is the script, and it's being produced in the real world.
Well, it's insane because, I mean, if they're such good story writers, then how is it that like the Talmud has so many inconsistencies and even gives, witness to Christ being God and truly resurrecting and stuff like that, that they would have that big of holes that would disprove their entire religion? Like the Talmud says there was an empty tomb, right? But they just say, oh, well, the body was stolen, even though we know from archaeological or from historical data and historiographic data that like that would have been impossible because there was one entry point. If you're a Roman guard who fell asleep on the job guarding that tomb, you would have been killed, right?
I thought it was the Gospels I know the Gospels say it portrays the Jews of knowing that he actually resurrected and that they didn't care anyway, which is supposedly portrays them as extra evil. I don't recall the Talmud saying that there was a empty tomb. Maybe you can give me that. I'm
positive the Talmud does.
But I do see little things in the Talmud that do allude to Jesus, them knowing that Jesus actually is like a quasi secret Messiah to them.
But again, I don't think that it's the 4D chess of like, oh, here's how, we're going to trick the dumb Goyim or anything like that. And, we have this secret Kabbalah, mysticism. I mean, that's like the best kept secret in the entire world, because, if they have that many verses of the Talmud that prove Jesus' divinity, and yet they emphatically, even when we discover their secret writings and stuff like that, still deny that he's the Messiah and still actively operate against his kingdom. I mean, like I said, I must be just the dumbest goy in the world for believing that.
Well, there's some Jews that believe he's the first Messiah, the Moshiach ben Joseph, the suffering servant who is like a heavenly high priest who dies and atones and goes to the Gentiles first. There are Jews. Messianic Judaism is growing a lot.
Oh, I know it is. But
Mhm.
what's funny about Messianic Judaism is that it's completely inconsistent. It doesn't they claim that Jesus is this Messiah, yet they don't do anything that he does, right? They might speak his name. They might say, oh, yeah, we believe that he's a Messiah, right? But it's like they don't accept the church that he founded. They don't accept the institutional hierarchy that he made. I mean, one of the prophecies that actually is said in the Talmud that's very interesting, proving that Jesus is God, is that the Messiah will reclaim the Grand Sanhedrin, right? This idea of like this teaching office of like rabbis. Well, how do we see that fulfilled by Jesus? Well, that's what we call in the Catholic Church the magisterium, right? The magisterium is founded by Jesus as a teaching office that acts on his behalf to be able to teach us the faith.
All right, go ahead, Adam. Respond. I'll read these.
I don't know. What's your point about, like, you're saying that they're Catholic Sanhedrin or something?
Well, essentially,
your point with the last statement.
That we know that the Sanhedrin was like the Jewish teaching office, and that because the Messiah would, as the Talmud says, would found this teaching office, right, to be able to properly delineate his word and what he had said, that points to Jesus, because Jesus did exactly that, right, with the church.
Jesus, I'm not understanding this argument. What you're getting at? Jesus started a church, so that's the new Sanhedrin.
Jesus started a teaching office that would act on his behalf, right? Like Luke 10:16, he who hears you hears me, and he who denies you.
Except Paul comes in and he never even knew Jesus, and then his Pauline theology is the one that wins out over the supposed disciples of Jesus, like Peter and James and John, I think it is, the pillars.
But is Pauline theology also, because I wanted to bring this up earlier, is Pauline theology in which he gets mad at Peter for not eating with the Gentiles and staying with the Jews, and in that way having a very Jewish behavior, right?
Yeah, but that was his rock. That's who. I mean, if you believe the story, I think Jesus is a purely fabricated creation, and I don't think that the Jews actually did reject him. There's just a story of Jews rejecting him, written by Jews from the scriptures. They saw in the scriptures that the Messiah would be rejected, that he would be, mocked, hated. They would not recognize him, things like this. That's just like what the story was, because they couldn't get the Gentiles to follow somebody. It's more tempting for them to follow somebody that they pretend that they're against. That was like the allure to set up the controlled opposition dialectic.
But then St. Justin Martyr in his day and St. Ambrose of Milan recounting how Jews burned down a church in the empire because they hate the church, and like St. Justin Martyr talking about the blasphemies and evils of the Jews, like they didn't witness or experience the hatred of the Jews in their time.
As the generations went on, there was real animosity between the two factions, between the two Jewish factions arguing over the true Messiah.
Well, but that doesn't make sense with even, again, historiographic data. Like, we know that the earliest churches weren't actually in the synagogues because they were like kicked out of the synagogue, right? Like they were completely forced out.
Churches started in the synagogues, though. That's how you know how Jewish it is. It started in the synagogues.
They would attempt to teach in the synagogues, and then they would get kicked out. So that's why they would go hold mass in houses. And it was a double effect because they also had to avoid, of course, the persecution on the part of Romans. And,
I've got a video on this. The Jewish perspective on this is that Peter and Paul are heroes because they went and separated Christianity and created a different religion in Rome for the Gentiles. They didn't want them to be with Jews. Christianity is like the temptation. It is the idolatrous version of Judaism, but it's still Torah Messianism. And it's still worshiping the God of Israel. And that's why Jews today say that Christianity is part of God's plan.
Yeah, but as a damning effect, right? As something that would damn me to hell if I followed it, right?
You mean Jews would be damned to hell if they followed Jesus?
No. I'm saying if a Jew sees Christianity as like part of their plan, it's exactly because they say that Christianity would damn me because I'm not following Judaism.
Part of their plan because Christians would damn them for not following Judaism.
No. I think you're misunderstanding. I'm saying in the Jewish view, they would see Christianity in what you're saying, they would see Christianity as good in this like negative sense.
Yes.
Because of the fact that the Gentiles would be damned.
Yes. They consider Christianity basically like Satanism. That's their adversary Messiah. In Kabbalah, they see, this is why the Talmud says he's boiling in excrement for mocking the prophets. They see Jesus and Christianity as representing Esau, and Esau's guardian angel is Samael or Satan. So they see, and they also believe Jesus is the reincarnation of Esau. So he's basically Satan. He prosecutes the Jews, he persecutes them, and he's tempting them to idol worship. They created a quasi-Jewish religion that the Jews are supposed to be tempted, but they're supposed to stay away from it, because there's many things that are like pagan that the Jews want nothing to do with. God is a man, drinking blood, not following the commandments. It's almost like a test from their perspective to weed out the weak Jews. And they do consider it idolatrous, although it's a preferred idolatry because it's still worshiping the God of Israel, but just they didn't get it quite right. The Trinity is unacceptable from the Jewish perspective.
If the Jews see me that way, that's on them. However, again, I fail to see then how this is part of their plot. They would then just say, okay, well, the dumb goyim or whatever worship Christ, worship the Trinity, right? Worship, God as he really is. And because I'm Jewish, or not me, but them saying because I'm Jewish, like I see it as a good thing that the Gentiles would be damned. I feel like you're actually kind of proving my thesis about how, again, Christianity isn't a part of their plan then, because they see it as a good thing that we're damned, we're evil, that Christianity is evil and what have you. How would they make this device that, again,
it's a trap
based on historiographic data, though? If we look, for instance, you're probably familiar in studying the Jews, Visigothic Spain, right? And the fall of Spain, and then the incursion of the Muslims and like the Jewish courts that existed, or like the Jewish presence in like the Sultan's courts in that, and like was it the Umayyad Caliphate that owned Spain? The Umayyads?
Oh, I don't know.
That's fine, but like the Caliphate that owned Spain, right? That was better for the Jews. Right. And that's why they actively, like during the Reconquista, would try and actually, even with arms, aid the Muslims against Christians. Right.
Sometimes. Yeah. But also sometimes Jews prefer more anti-Semitic type of leadership because they fear assimilation so much.
But that doesn't make any sense from the standpoint that you have great saints like Saint Raymond de Pentfort, who went all up and down Europe preaching to the Jews and actually drawing them away from Judaism. Like there's a substantial amount of like Italian and Spanish people who haven't been Jews for like 600, 500 years, right? But have Jewish heritage because like those were who the friars and the Dominicans preach to, essentially, right? And would go in their synagogues and would preach to them, and it was an order by the king to preach to them. Like that seems so counterintuitive for Jews to be like, yes, please invade our synagogues, please, totally throw off our business, burn our most holy and sacred books to be able to somehow prop us up. Like I'm not.
Well, do they not always reference the pogroms and the Inquisition and the persecutions now? Is that not part of their weaponized status and their unique suffering and victim status, that history?
It's fine. It's fine if they do reference it. But again, it is like to use it essentially again as this 4D chess, they're retconning it, right? They're retconning that suffering.
It is a 4D chess, though. And what I see is you don't care, this theme that like you don't care what the rabbis say. Oh, the rabbis may believe that, but it's not important because only the Jewish book says that we win in the end if we believe in the Jewish Messiah. And I hear apologetics for the supremacist verses in the Torah, like I showed, sucking the milk of the Gentiles. The nations will grab the end of the garment and say, God is with you, show us the way, all these things. The Christians are going to be beheaded and flogged in the synagogues, and that's a win. Like I just hear lots of copes about all this and excuses. And instead of condemning, disavowing the Torah, you say, oh, it's only the Talmud the problem, and the Torah is the word of God. If you're not opposing Zionism or the God of Israel or the Judeo agenda, if you can't reject the Torah.
All right, give a response, Pinesap, then I'm going to read through some of these.
Okay, gotcha. Well, again, I don't see it. I mean, one of the most famous interactions that you have in history is Theodore Herzl going, when he's founding the World Zionist Congress, he goes to Rome and he meets with one of my favorite, I hope he becomes a saint, Cardinal Mary Duval, right? And he meets with Cardinal Mary Duval and he says, hey, can I have an audience with Saint Pius X to be able to found the nation state of Israel? And Saint Pius X talks to Cardinal Mary Duval and says, after that, we, because he didn't have any physical arms to be able to, he says, we can't prevent the Jews from physically going to the land of Israel, but we don't support it, right? We don't support them engaging in false worship, right? And in denying Christ Jesus. So again, it's like, you keep saying that we're playing into this plan all while
plenty of Christians did support the return of the land,
and even actively throwing them off. I mean, what did the Crusaders do when they came to the land of Israel? They actively.
Do you think that Israel would be created if not for Christianity? Without the help of Christians, there would be no modern state of Israel.
I don't care. Again, I don't care about evangelical Zionists. I'm a Catholic.
But they exist. They exist. There's lots of them. Is Christianity so flawed that you could have all of these horribly misinterpretations and hijacked of religion and stuff? This is God's divine plan for evangelicals to exist and help them create the state of Israel. Do you think it's do you think it's God's plan for the state of Israel to be created?
No, not at all.
But it happened?
It happened because of...
So God's plan is not playing out as he planned?
No, the whole thing with biblical prophecy and scripture is, again, there's nothing that pertains to the nation state of Israel being created. If you have some crazy evangelicals who go and do that, that's them. I started this debate with the preface of, I'm not arguing for evangelicals. They are heretics. They don't believe in true Christianity. They may be baptized, sure, but they don't believe in the true faith. The true faith is the original church that Jesus Christ founded, the Catholic Church, right? And I argue from that perspective. And the Catholic Church, that's not in the cards for any biblical prophecy to create the nation state of Israel.
Right.
You don't think there's any verses in the Old Testament that talk about them going back to the land? Because there's a lot of stuff like that.
There's an understanding that they would go back to the land, but that we wouldn't actively aid them in going back to the land, right? That we would somehow actively support them going back to the land, or saying, oh, this is wonderful, this is awesome. It's great when they shoot Palestinian babies and say that they were used as human shields. That's never been in any plan. We've spoken out against it. We still do. Pope Francis recognizes Palestine. What's more a thorn in a Jew's side than like him doing that, right? People got mad at him last year because he said that following the old law, the old covenant, won't give you life. How is that aiding?
And then he apologized to the rabbis too for that. He also says he wants to eradicate anti-Semitism. He says inside every Christian is a Jew. He's got. Let me play you a real good verse from him. This is the leadership.
I know what he has said. I'm familiar with all the statements. I haven't glossed over them. But again, this is also a definitional problem too. Does Pope Francis believe in dispensationalism, where a Jew can go be a good Jew and a Christian can be a good Christian? Both can be equally saved? No.
Well, he was in Vatican II. What is it? Nostra Aetate, right? That they don't have to, that they're not going to try to proselytize the Jews anymore. They're not going to tell them that they're damned for hell. And he calls them, he says, this is a quote from the Pope.
I'm going to die.
Die what?
Dude, the Nostra Aetate argument, I deal with that like every other day. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are so many heretics and schismatics that bring that up, bro. Like literally, Nostra Aetate.
So the Catholic Church, the one true church,
we have to evangelize the Jews.
Man.
It still reaffirms that.
Okay, look, it
still reaffirms that.
It says God continues to work among the people of the old covenant and to bring forth treasures of wisdom which flow from their encounter with his word. For this reason, the church also is enriched when she receives the values of Judaism. That's Pope Francis.
Yes,
Paul's,
by them becoming Catholic, right?
no, that's not what it says. It doesn't say becoming
good Jews.
You're reading that into it completely. He does not say that at
Because
all.
I'm using the proper hermeneutic when we understand this relationship between Judaism and Christianity. Pope Francis doesn't affirm universal salvation.
So a heretic has taken over the true church.
No, I didn't say that. Pope Francis isn't a heretic.
Okay.
All right, let me read these. We'll put a pin in it there, and we'll pick it back up. Let's see. Papal Groiper says, for Adam, can Adam give some examples of non-Christian pushback thinking movements here against Judaism?
Yes. All the empires that came before the Roman Empire, before they became the Holy Roman Empire, they all pushed back against Judaism. And there's secular nations that don't fall for any of this Jewish nonsense. They laugh at the idea that they have a covenant and they're chosen by God. There was the Germans pandered to Christians, but many of them didn't actually believe it and were trying to shift away from it. So yes, there has been some. And Christianity is not really opposition to Judaism. You're not real opposition if you worship the God of Israel, believe the Torah is the word of God, and follow the King of the Jews. That's not real opposition to Judaism.
It is real opposition because they don't recognize Jesus Christ.
So you disagree on who the Messiah is, but you both believe in Torah messianism. I don't give a rat's ass about a Jewish Messiah, let alone if they rejected the Jewish Messiah. And then, oh, you're so happy now they accepted the Jewish Messiah. Like that's like reverse psychology. That's what's the term I'm looking for? Not 3D chess. That's like theological warfare, tricking you that that's a win when they're accepting the Messiah that was supposed to come in to begin with.
Yeah, and then not observing any of their laws that say that goyim are dumb cattle, or that they have some sort of supremacy over me. Do you know
that's what the Torah says, though?
No. What do you know? What the Council of Florence says is, if I or anyone else, even a Jew converting to Christianity, observes Jewish rites and practices.
Yeah, the Jews don't want you following their practices either, though.
That's fine, but again, that's oppositional to Judaism. That sure isn't bending the heel if I'm like not actively supporting them doing it. Wouldn't it make more sense, Adam, if there was a false religion that said, okay, fine, I'll give you Gentiles shouldn't practice Jewish practices, but then says it's great when Jews do it, right? It's awesome when Jews do it. We don't say that. That's not the Catholic claim. It never has been.
Deuteronomy 26:19. He has declared that he will set you in praise, fame, and honor high above all the goyim he has made, and that you will be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he promised.
Because again, this gets back to what I originally said with the whole chicken and the egg thing. God is the God of all men. He created both Jew and Gentile in his image. The whole drama of salvation is that every group on earth fell away except the Jews, right? And so oftentimes in the Old Testament, when it is referred to as the Gentiles, it's not in this Jewish racial way. It's not this like blood purity, like if you have Jewish blood, you're automatically, it's not you probably know who was that guy in the 90s who had the big white beard. Some Jews thought he was the Messiah or what have you.
In the 90s? Somebody thought he was the Messiah in the 90s? I have no idea. Well,
some Jews did, not all Jews. His name was
Rebbe Schneerson. Okay,
yes,
Rebbe Schneerson, yeah.
So Rebbe has this very famous quote, right, where he's like, there's no such thing as a non-religious Jew. Like, he's like, you just either are a Jew or you're not, right? Yeah. But in the Old Testament, God punishes the Jews several times when they fall away from obeying his word. Right. I also wanted to bring that up. Like, the Jews do not have this protected status where, again, it's like today where they can just do whatever they want and it doesn't matter because they're always God's chosen people. God in the Old Testament punishes them several times.
I'm aware of that, but the problem is, though, that you still believe that they're God's chosen people. You grant Christians to believe in the new covenant. You have to acknowledge and corroborate that the old covenant was real. So you believe in their chosen status. That's why Christians are enabling Judaism.
Chosen in what way?
Chosen to be his nation of priests. As Deuteronomy 26 says, he has declared that he will set you in praise, fame, and honor high above all the nations. It's suck the wealth of the nations, reign over the nations, all of these things. And all I hear is I just keep hearing you and all Christians downplaying the supremacy in the Torah and saying, oh, well, that's the rabbis believe, but that's, we have a different interpretation. So that's not really important. This is giving them a pass in a way. It's mirroring their Jewish mythologies and running cover for them instead of just coming to my side and saying, you were never chosen. Your God's fake. These are fairy tales. No, you don't have any prophets. Instead, you go, oh, yes, all of that is true, except you just you miss the Messiah. That's the only issue you have with them. Like, that's why it's a limited form of opposition.
Well, I have opposition to them also thinking that Goyim are dumb cattle. God also does as well. God doesn't like. How can you complain about them thinking that you're cattle when Christians proudly call themselves sheep following the Jewish shepherd, the Jewish Messiah? The sheep understanding cattle. The Jews are also referred to as sheep too. Do you understand that? Like both Jew, like we are all God. Jesus is the good shepherd, right? Whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, you're one of God's sheep, right? I'm not a sheep. No, I'm not a sheep in a flock following the Jewish God. No. Okay. I would not agree to that. Well, that's fine. But again, that understanding is for both Jew and Gentile. It's not just for Gentiles. Right. Yeah. They follow their Messiah too. So they could consider themselves sheep to the Messiah. Sure. By then not following the laws and the, again, dictates that they have that purport their supremacy, right? Because you can't, again, Catholicism's claim is that you can't believe that you're somehow more special and awesome than another Catholic because you're Jewish, right? Galatians refers to this idea. There is neither Jew nor Greek, nor free nor slave, nor male nor female in Christ Jesus, right? You're just either a Catholic or you're not. So you don't have this special status if you're a Jewish convert to Catholicism. You're as Catholic as me or anyone else, right? With zero Jewish heritage. Sure, that's your view. Catholic means universal. So yeah, that they would have a universal view towards religion. They want all of the nations to worship their God, but to keep the Jews, the Jews are to be kept separate. But why is it that all of the nations are to worship a God who also demands of them their submission and a lack of racial pride over their Gentile brethren? That's what I'm not seeing. That doesn't make any sense because it's like, why are they then having to give up the idea that they're better? They're not. They haven't given up the idea that they're better. They haven't? Because that's in the Torah. Brother, no. When the Jews have not given up that idea. To Catholicism, because a Jewish person has to be saved. That's right? A different thing. Then we say if you follow Judaism and you reject Christ, you're not saved. Wow, that's a pretty bum deal for a Jewish person, man. Pretty bum deal. You say that it's a bum deal for anybody that doesn't want to worship the Jewish God. Okay, not just Jews. Okay, so. But again, what are they getting out of this deal if it said, okay, if you don't give up your... Again, they got the whole world worshiping their God. That was their ultimate goal. That's what they're getting out of the deal. They got their victim status. They've got us casted as the villains, and they got the whole world worshiping their God. They got their State of Israel, the Abraham Accords. They got their evangelical Christians, millions of them all over the world that are aiding them. Believing that they're chosen, believing that you're blessed if you bless them, fighting anti-Semitism, all of these things. They got a lot. They're doing pretty well. And a lot of it is thanks to Christianity. Most of it. Thanks to Catholicism that, again, demands of them when they convert that they don't have any pride or presumption over their brothers. Like, that's what I'm not seeing. The deal is you have to become Catholic to be saved. And a Jewish person becomes Catholic, they can't observe the Talmud. They can't observe the Kabbalah. They can't observe any of these things. The main opposition, like if you look at and again, this comes from Dr. E. Michael Jones, like Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. If you look at the opposition between Judaism and Christianity, Protestants oftentimes went along with Judaism because they had a hatred for the true Church of Christ, right? It's like the whole enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah, makes total sense, right? But Catholics were resistant to the Kabbalah, the Talmud, and said, furthermore, if you observe these things, you're not going to be saved. That, again, that's a bum deal if you're a Jew.
There was also Jesuits and Christian Kabbalah that was that the church was meddling in. I see Franson in the chat. He says the Jewish God is Baal. Paul very clearly says, is it the God of the Jews only? No, it's also the God of the Gentiles. It's the same God.
All right, let me read these. Go ahead, finish your thought. No, finish your thought. You good? Okay.
That's fine.
Also, shout out Ben Thorpe got banned in the chat. I didn't do that. I unbanned him. So I don't know. Look, keep personal beefs out of the modding decisions. I realize he's a controversial figure, but don't ban people that could potentially be on the show. That's an obvious no. And so whoever did that, I'm not going to make a big deal about it, but don't do that again. Okay. I don't like that. Okay, now don't ban potential guests on the show. I don't really give a fuck whether you like them or not. Okay, now I'll leave that here. Anonymous said, Pinesap, will the billions of Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, and other non-Christians burn in hell forever? Are they all evil?
Okay, so this is a very interesting question. So are non-Christians necessarily evil? Well, non-Christians are capable of doing good. That's never our claim that, like, you know, if there's an atheist person that, just everything they touch is like Midas evil or what have you. But we understand that if God is the source of all goodness and God has given us a way to worship him, then we have to coincide with that. Now, there's an understanding that, let's say someone was not born into the graces of knowing God and his church, and they were born, like, let's say in the Amazon or what have you, and had no access to a Bible, a church, a missionary, what have you, and all they could do was follow their conscience to the best, have a true contrition for sins or what have you, then if God could read on their heart, right, that had they come into contact with the Catholic Church, they would convert and they would be a Catholic and they'd be a faithful Catholic and a devout Catholic. They could be brought out of that predicament and mystically incorporated into the body of Christ. But that's a very small amount of people, because what we have to understand is when we're born, it's not that we're born good and then God damns us. It's that we're born basically like in the ocean, right? Like we're born like, on rafts drowning and there's all these waves. And it's the church that is the ark of salvation that brings us out of the water and into the arms of our loving God.
All right, now let me read the next one. Grace Thorpe, a.k.a. Joan, which I'm not sure if that's actually her or not. I don't know if she got banned too. I'll check it out. Don't ban potential guests on the show. I'll repeat that. Anyway, she said, Adam worships the Jews more than anyone. He thinks they are superhumans, capable of carrying out a conspiracy over literally thousands of years. He's the ultimate Judeophile. What do you say to that, Adam?
I've heard this quote from Christians many times. I don't think they have superpowers. Christians believe they have superpowers, that they can speak for God, that they're a nation of priests, that they're his chosen people, that they have this history of miracles, that their homeland is the Holy Land. I believe none of that. I believe that they came up with a very effective deception, which is basically just psychological religious warfare. But come on, let's get serious. Christians worship the God of Israel, the Jewish Messiah, the King of the Jews, the Hebrew Torah, and they're going to say, I think Jews, that I worship Jews. It's stupid.
All right, now let's see. She is 20 years old, chat. Yes, I saw a couple people speculating on that. That's what she says, at least. All right, now. Okay, now Anonymous says, Adam, do you think the Christians conquered the Gentiles and this was bad? Wait, Adam, you think the Christians conquered the Gentiles and this was bad, but your entire perspective of Christianity is that it's a controlled op to pacify Jewish opposition. So which one is it? Is Christianity pacified or power hungry?
It's both, depending on what verses you want to cite. And no, the Christians didn't conquer the Gentiles. Christian Gentiles did work to impose Torah, the Torah messianism and the God of Israel on other Gentiles, because the Jews couldn't do it themselves. They're so small in number. The Christians did it for them. And like I said, Maimonides, their top rabbi, says this was God's plan, preparing the way, getting the Gentiles to be Noahides. So it was the Jews that conquered. The Jews' ultimate goal was having the nations worship their God, and Christianity accomplished that.
Also, there is a little audio feedback that's been happening a little bit. Maybe turn down your audio just a little bit, Pinesap. I know you don't have headphones on, so there's really no way to stop it completely, because I saw somebody complain about, look, it's headphones, or that's probably going to happen. It depends on the PC. Sometimes it's better than others, but I can already hear it less now, so I think that's pretty good. Like I can barely hear it now. Gersh says, give Pinesap a cozy channel. We love Pinesap. Grace Thorpe with another.
He had one. Doesn't he have one?
No, I don't.
Well, he might.
I heard you were the theologian on Cozy.
Well, I would say that honestly, classical theist is the theologian on Cozy, but I love to talk theology.
Right, a theologian on Cozy. Grace Thorpe says this: Adam, if the Jews were really powerful enough to do all this and trick millions of people for thousands of years, do you really think they would slip up so bad that you could figure out their whole scheme? Okay, there's her super chat there. What do you say to that?
It's not even like much to figure out. Like I cover in these videos, I go through the verses. Like what I wanted to get to when we're done with these super chats is how Jesus in the star prophecy and what that means. What's the context of the star prophecy? And it says about conquering the kings and conquering the nations, like every single time. That's the purpose of the Messiah, to conquer the nations on behalf of Jewish prophecy.
Grace has a really smart mouth on her, doesn't she? I think that just occurred to me. Papal Groiper says this: St. Paul clearly says that he met St. Peter and James multiple times, and this is how we knew of Jesus' life, Galatians 2:11. Paul also saw the risen Jesus outside of Damascus. He also gets a vision from Jesus in 2 Corinthians.
Okay, let me respond to those.
Sure, go ahead.
Number one, Paul says that he was very adamant. He spoke with no man when he learned his gospel. He got it strictly from visions and revelation. And this is very telling, because this is what you do to have authority in the early Christianity, is pretend to have visions, or maybe really be schizophrenic or delusional and actually have them, and then read the scriptures and see him in the scriptures. So he didn't claim to meet with any of the apostles until I think it was 15 years later, or after the fact. And the other point, what was the second half of the super chat?
Let's see. Paul also saw the risen Jesus outside of Damascus.
Right.
He also gets a vision from Jesus in 2 Corinthians.
Yeah, that's the story. I don't buy the road to Damascus story at all. And then, he never knew the real Jesus, but he had a vision and saw the ghost Jesus, and we're supposed to believe in this. Paul, in none of his letters, even mentions the road to Damascus story. He doesn't say that the whole story of the light, and also it contradicts. He said there's no contradictions. One of the verses in the gospel says that he saw the light and heard the voice, and then the other one was that they didn't hear the voice, but they saw the light. So they're like flipped up backwards. But he doesn't write about that in any of the epistles. That's not until Acts, which is coming in like the year, probably the late 90s. This is 20 years at least after Paul was dead.
All right, now let's keep going here. There's okay. Schizo Pattern Enjoyer says this: there are 4 definitions of Jew: the modern Talmudic religion, the 12 bloodlines of Israel, those who held the old covenant with God, and those who hold the new covenant with God. Adam is hot swapping.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
Adam is hot swapping between meanings to confuse the issue. We Jew. Now I'll let you respond, Adam, since it's directed to him, and then you can follow up if you want, and we'll just keep moving on here. Go ahead, Adam.
Christians love to create a false distinction and play semantics about what a Jew is. They go, it's Yehudi, it's Judaite, Judeans, people from Judah. But in my opinion, a Jew is somebody that thinks they're a chosen person from the Bible, whether it's Hebrews or Israelites or later the Jews, the guys in the Middle East that think that they're God's chosen people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. the chosen descendants from the covenant with Abraham, all of the descendants as the stars in the sky. That's who I think of, and who, in my mind, when I define a Jew, that's what it is.
All right, go ahead, Pinesap. Follow up a little bit if you want.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that delineation is very, very important. And, I've had discussions about this a lot of times because oftentimes that's the confusion online, right? Is like who is a Jew, right? Because it's like there's the ethno-religious context, there's the concept of that we are the new Jews as Christians, right? Whether we come from an ethnically Jewish background or background of being a Gentile, right? Doesn't matter. That the Jews were those who worshipped according to true worship in the Old Testament that became fulfilled in the New. And then what was the last definition that person said? I think I got three. And then of course, the bloodlines, of course. Yes, that one.
All right, now let me keep going here. Ed says this: Adam, the greatest miracle is that of creation itself. You experience that miracle daily through becoming a father. Your daughter isn't a script. She isn't a movie. She's a beautiful child made in the image of God. Do you have a response to that, sir? Or just let it.
Yeah, I don't believe in creation. I don't believe in the Genesis story. I look for natural explanations, and I think most likely the best theory is that the universe is eternal.
Confused Orange says this: that's not, he compares you to Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, your older discount version. He said, okay, that's not nice. Although Shaggy probably pretty wealthy due to all the Scooby-Doo residuals, now that I think about it. So maybe that's not as bad as I thought. WD says this: Talmud and Messianic Judaism just comes across as a cope for being wrong. Of course, they want to think their rise to power in the modern day is due to a theological trick rather than own up to their deceitful actions in the secular world. And I guess that's kind of directed towards you, Adam, and then you could follow up too if you want, Pinesap. Go ahead, Adam.
There's no greater deceitful action than the creation of Christianity. Without Christianity, the Jews would not be in the position that they're at today, with millions of people, billions of people around the world worshiping the God of Israel, and how well that's played out for them.
All right, go ahead, Pinesap, if you have a follow-up on that.
I actually did have a follow-up, but it's more of a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So, Adam kind of draws this delineation between, and not to straw man him, I don't think that Adam believes that every non-Christian was somehow perfectly opposed to Judaism. But it's interesting that, we're talking about like the Roman Empire, for instance, right? I mentioned St. Theodosius, the right believing, like suppressing like the pagan cults and what have you. And an interesting fact is, Adam, do you think that Julian the Apostate was a Shabbos Goy?
You're going to say because he was going to allow them to rebuild the temple, right?
He was going to allow them to rebuild the temple, and at the same time, he actively persecuted Christians.
Yeah,
and contrast that with the Christian Roman emperors, like
he was probably trying to placate
the exact opposite.
He was probably trying to placate the Jewish lobby. That could be it.
For sure. Oh, there's no doubt about that. Well, I'm not saying that Julian the Apostate believed in Judaism. That's not my argument. Right. But isn't it interesting how the more oppositional attitude, or the one trying to combat Jewish power, came from St. Theodosius versus that of Julian the Apostate, who was not Christian. In fact, you probably know this, he bathed in bull's blood to try and undo his baptism.
That's funny. Judaism wasn't a threat to Romans to convert as Christianity was. There was far more, obviously, because Christianity doesn't require circumcision, and it's more formulated for pagans to adopt it. So Christianity, from the pagan Roman emperor perspective, was more of a threat. But yeah, I've got in my debate with E. Michael Jones that I did here on the great Killstream a year or so ago, I read in his book how they talk about that it's the Romans viewed Christianity as like a form of Jewish subversion and Jewish warfare. So that would explain why while Julian would persecute Christianity while trying to placate the Jews with their temple. And I don't believe the story that E. Michael Jones gives, that they tried to build a temple and fireballs came up from the earth to stop them. Sounds
That's pretty well documented by even non-Christian historians of that time.
Okay, press X to doubt.
All right, now press X for another super chat. Confused Orange also sent that in on Entropy, the Shaggy one. So I see it on there now. See, I am checking Entropy. I just checked the other one first. Let's see. Let me make sure I'm on point here. Yeah, I think I read the Messianic one. WD says, Pine delivered every argument I wanted to hear in all the previous debates with Green. 07 to both of y'all. Papal Groiper says... I don't know if this is true. This is super true. Papal Groiper says the swastika is called the Hakenkreuz, hooked cross. It's one of the oldest Christian symbols, LOL. Seems like I may have heard that, but I don't. That's the super chatter. Okay. Cag Mike with the 10 spot. Thank you very kindly. F1 Groiper says, thanks for the great show, Ralph, with a 20 spot. Much appreciated. Cookus says modern Jews, quote unquote, are no Jews at all. He mentions something about a particular synagogue that I won't repeat. And then he says, we Jew, I love Pinesap. Yeah, Pinesap. I thought he said appy at first, but that's an exclamation point. Okay. All right. So we can pick it back up there with maybe some areas that either one of you guys haven't wanted to go to. I'll let Pinesap lead it off because most of these questions have been directed towards Adam, which could be, he's just gotten to talk a lot more the last segment. So weigh in here with anywhere you haven't taken it or some things you wanted to bring up that you haven't, and then I'll let Adam do the same.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that stands out in the history of Christianity versus Judaism, and when I say Christianity, I'm not referring to evangelical Zionists who go to, Bible Creek Baptist Church in, Pueblo, Colorado, right? But the true Church of Christ, Catholicism, you see throughout history this antagonistic attitude. So I brought up Julian the Apostate with Adam, of course, right? Kind of mentioning the rebuilding of the Third Temple, but you even have very interesting interactions such as Napoleon, right? So Napoleon, early in his reign, he starts off and he's kind of has this more positive view towards the church than the prior French revolutionaries, which, by the way, were anti-Catholic and were funded by Jews actively. I believe the Rothschilds bankrolled them, right? And he's essentially at first somewhat positive towards the church. You have that 1801, I believe it was a concordance between Pope Pius VII and Napoleon, saying he's I'll protect the church, I'll keep her safe. But then he shifts his attitude and he's quoted as saying, this will be the last of the Piuses, meaning I'm going to kill Pope Pius VII, right? I'm going to end his line. I'm going to end the line of the popes. And on top of that, many Jews in the region of France and that kind of region of Europe some thought he was the Messiah because he rebuilt the Sanhedrin, right? He restored their power. He was seen as a great champion of the Jews. And here's someone who's setting himself against the Catholic Church, right? Here's someone who's aiding more of their plan as more of a Shabbos Goy than any clergyman or, the Holy Father, Pope Pius VII himself, right? And that's one of many examples. But I think when we actually look at the itinerary of who is best aided the Zionist plot, the Zog plot, it doesn't shake out to be Catholics. It shakes out to be the enemies of the church, right? I mean, you even had cases, I remember Michael Jones talks about this, about in England, some of the antagonism towards the church, right? And even subversive characters like William of Ockham have a more positive view of Talmudic Judaism than, saints like St. Thomas Aquinas or what have you, right? So, I mean, that's a pretty interesting coincidence that the enemies of the church seem to be a greater aid and support to Judaism than anyone inside the church.
The problem with the relationship between the church and the synagogue is that it's given them their victim status. This is so important to them that you have to understand how anti-Semitism benefits them. It's not my perspective. This is what all the rabbis always say. It stops them from assimilating. It's part of God's divine plan. And sure, there's some secular people that maybe worked with the Jews more than some Catholics might have throughout history. That's kind of an anecdotal thing. all in all, though, Christianity, even the persecution and the anti-Semitic versions of Christianity, ultimately have benefited, especially as we see today, where they have benefited Judaism. You have to understand both philo-Semitic Christianity and anti-Semitic Christianity both have a role to play.
And you don't think that paganism of the Roman Empire that actively persecuted Judaism was viewed the same way?
No.
No?
It had problems with Jews for better reasons than you killed God. That's the red herring that delegitimizes the opposition. It undermines our moral high ground, and it turns us into the villains.
How so? Because to me,
There's no reasonable person.
It would be a better example to see the Romans as having like temple prostitutes and, treating like, again, the Colosseum events where, slaves are shedding their blood and being killed. And, a Jewish person pointing at that and saying, look at the disgusting Gentiles, look how they revel in violence and prostitution and lust. Than for a Christian who is the opposite of that, rejects the world, hates the world, ends that stuff, as being somehow an example of again, going aside with their plot, right? Being the perfect like prop up for the Gentiles that they need. I would see a Roman pagan indulging in debauchery, right? And idolatry as being more of a prop up for a Jew to point at and say, look at how disgusting the Goyim are, than a faithful Christian who shrinks from the world.
The pagans oppose the Jews because of legitimate reasons, for real concerns, instead of stupid reasons like the Christians do. Look at today. No person thinks it's reasonable for Christians to blame Jews for killing God or for being Christ killers or saying that they worship the devil or these type of things. All that does is increase sympathy for Jews and make Christians look more unhinged.
But again,
with our modern sensibilities,
this seems like a bit of a cope, because easily, what do we hear in the victim narrative, right? We hear many of the references to other nations that were not Christian also persecuting the Jews. How are they?
Yeah, but they say none has been as bad as the relationship between Esau, blaming that it's a special, unique hatred from Christians that really does nothing just turns them into the victims, blame for no reasons. Because look, today nobody's going, oh yeah, the Christians are really good because they've always persecuted those Christ killers. Nobody says that. Christianity, the church, the popes, they're all repenting. Oh, we were wrong. We should have never done those things. We owe you now. We're gonna, that type of mentality.
Well, here's actually what also kind of throws
happen.
off your narrative though too. Mm-hmm. Because it seems like you want to have it both ways. It seems like you want this oppositional attitude towards Judaism, and you're like, why are you Catholics like going along with this and what have you? You want this opposition, but when this opposition is presented, you're like, oh, it's actually facilitating their plan. I'll give you a good example.
It's opposing them for the wrong reason.
Hold up, don't interrupt. Let me finish. Mm-hmm. So Pope Innocent III, right, who, he's like the epitome of like the medieval Pope, like very ultramontanistic, like papal monarchy and stuff like that. And he actively wrote against unjust persecutions of the Jews and said, hey, if they're not hurting anything, leave them alone. Now, forgive me if I'm straw manning you. I feel like if you were presented with that, you would say, yes, this is an example of the docile Gentile laying down for the Jew. But then if Pope Innocent III is also like, oh, well, maybe there's this troublesome group of Jews that needs to be dealt with, you're like, this is also laying down for the Jews. So it's like you want to have your cake and eat it too.
Mm-mm. No, I'm saying there's good reasons to condemn Judaism and there's bad reasons. There's counterproductive reasons. If your big problem with Jews is that they rejected their Messiah, that's a bad reason. That's the point I'm getting at. That's the reason they use Christianity as a pass and as a cover to whitewash, the usury or the monopoly business, or just, having hatred towards Gentiles and wanting to dwell alone and kept separate. They say, all of the hate is because Christians and them blaming us for killing God?
I think a deeper reason, though, is again what I kind of and we're kind of going around in circles when I say this, so I'll see if we can kind of jump off from here. But a deeper reason, I think it's a deeper reason to understand that the Christian opposition to Judaism is because they rejected the Messiah versus, again, a pagan easily depicted, oh, these are the gross Gentiles who worship idols and sacrifice at their fake altars and stuff like that, kind of pagan reasons for opposing Judaism. I think one makes us, I mean, even just from I don't like to argue from an aesthetic standpoint because it's about truth, but it's like from an aesthetical standpoint, like how much more horrifying is it? Because like when Josephus is writing about like the various nations, right, that kind of existed in his history, he's writing about how, look at all these gross, disgusting Gentile nations that practice homosexuality. And we Jews, we don't do that, right? That's gross. That's anathema. Which I'll fully admit, I would agree with Josephus on that. That is gross. That is disgusting, right? But, he sees a more probable cause for the Jews being set apart by citing that example than if he pointed to a Christian nation being like, oh, wait, they're also opposed to, sodomy as we are. Oh, I guess that's not really a good reason to like cite against them or what have you. You know what I'm saying?
I don't exactly.
I did get a little.
Yeah, a Jew wouldn't blame a Christian for not being homosexual. Yes, I do agree with that.
What I'm essentially saying is that I think with paganism, they have more ammo for the suffering narrative than they do with Christianity. Because with paganism, they can present us as dumb brutes who, of course, they would do these things. They're the idol worshipers. They're the dummies. They don't know anything. And I know they say the same about Christians, but again, Christians have their morality intact. Pagans, it's like, what do? They sacrifice, they do, weird blood rituals and have orgies and what have you, right? One
difference between
practicing paganism.
The difference between pagan criticism of Christianity and, pagan criticism of Jews and Christian persecution of Jews is that Christianity gave them a special, unique suffering status because it was the religion of the Christians. See, we should be opposing Jews because of their religion. We shouldn't be opposing Jews because it's our religion that they're the villains. That's the difference. They created a religion where the Jews were the central to the story, but they were the villains. They were the villains, but they still became central to the story. And in fact, they're almost the heroes in a way. If you ask Paul, have they been abandoned? No, God forbid. And all of Israel will be saved. And yeah, they're your enemies according to the Gospels, but they're chosen on behalf of the patriarchs and this type of stuff. So they're your enemies, but they're also chosen. So Christianity has been in opposition, but it's been a controlled opposition because they still worship the God of Israel, the Torah Messiah, and worship the King of the Jews.
I don't think that's accurate, though, from the standpoint that, for instance, when we talk about the chosen status, again, like, does God love the Jewish people? Yeah, he doesn't hate them, of course, right? But that verse does understand that a Jew cannot be a good Jew and be saved, right? Even though in Judaism, right, because I understand, and I could easily hear the retort right away, so I'll cover it right now. I know in Judaism, there would be no standpoint of mixing like religious syncretism, essentially, in a sense of like, oh, we're willing to get along with the pagan Gentiles, right, by mixing our religions. But you even see like sorry, let me go back. But what you do see is a greater willingness sometimes on the part of the pagans to practice this syncretism and to incorporate Judaism into their fold. I mean, one of the central motifs of like the book of Maccabees, for instance, is the concept of the Hellenized Jews versus the Zealot Jews. The Zealot Jews were the ones like Judas Maccabeus who set himself apart and was like, I'm not going to go along with this idol worship. But when Alexander the Great conquered Judea and conquered that region, right, there were plenty of Jews that said, okay, well, I can kind of practice Judaism with this mix of like Greek, mythic worship and what have you, and that's perfectly fine and well, right? Because the Greeks were fine with that. They were tolerant of that, right? And other pagans were as well. So again, it's like who's being in some sense the greater supporter of Jews in that way? Is it the one who says, and I mean, you could even go further and like, I know the Roman Empire persecuted the Jews for a while, but after kind of Christianity became their new enemy, right? Jews were actually given really sort of a protected status, right? I mean, they were allowed to do what they did. They were, understood and recognized by the empire. Hey, you can go do your, practices and teach in the synagogues and what have you, but we're going to kill this group that we view as being, enemies of our pagan religion, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
There's nothing more Jewish than being anti-pagan. The pagans were the enemies of the Jews. God's a jealous God. He hates idol worship. He wants no religious competition. And then that became the enemies of Christians, is also pagans.
But such an enemy of the Jews that they're willing to even kind of allow some Jewish worship amongst them and even kind of be incorporated into it, although in a messed up way.
They had some tolerance, but they also, like, where was it? Alexandria. They had like a pogrom or something on the Alexandrian Jews. They were kicked out of Rome at some points as well. It wasn't all love, but sorry.
Oh, no, it's fine.
Is that playing? I want to ask you about, again, the idea that Jesus, the Messiah in Judaism is about conquering the Gentiles. What do you think of this verse? 1 Corinthians 15. Then the end will come when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father, after he, the Messiah, has destroyed all dominion, authority, and power, for he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. So if Christianity is mostly for Gentiles, Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles. Who were the enemies of the ancient Jews? The Gentiles. Who was their Messiah ruling over and making their footstools and enemies under his feet? The Gentiles. What nations have adopted Jesus as their leader? The Gentile nations. Jesus has taken over all dominion, authority, and power of the Gentile world. This is what Paul's agenda was. Paul was a Pharisee Jew. He claimed he studied, he was a zealot, studied under Gamaliel, the top Sanhedrin leader in Jerusalem. And this was his goal, for the Messiah to rule over the nations. He even says, Romans 15, according to Isaiah, the seed of Jesse will reign over the nations. We're talking about a Jewish deity, a Jewish dictator ruling over the Goyim. That's what Christianity is, except you're willingly doing it. There's no difference between rabbis and Christians. The rabbis chant, "We want Moshiach now." The Groypers chant, "Christ is King." There's like no daylight between the two. They both saying they want a Jewish Torah Messiah to rule the world.
Except that implies two different things.
How's
That's the whole crux of this debate, because none of us dispute the elements of similarity in, modern day rabbinical Judaism. And again, wanting a Messiah to rule. Okay, we want the Messiah to rule, but that means two different things, right?
You want the Jewish Messiah to rule. He came to the Jews first. It's the Jewish God.
The God of all men, the God
of the Jews first. They came to the Jews first.
All mankind, right?
It was Jewish. Was Jesus Jewish?
Gentiles are too.
Was he Jewish?
Jew and Gentile.
Was Jesus Jewish?
Yeah, Jesus was ethnically Jewish. He was a Galilean Jew, but he came to rule over all men.
Yeah, according to the Jews, he was to rule over all men. Yes, that's the plan.
But again,
you see this as a good thing. I see this as a Jewish takeover. You see this as a good
blasphemer and said, "We're going to kill you and we're going to stone you," because and then eventually did offer him up to Pilate.
And you should be happy, because you wouldn't be saved if they didn't do that, right?
I'm not happy that my Lord had to suffer for my sake.
That was his plan. He said, "Satan, get behind me."
Here's the thing. I do rejoice in that he would have such a great of love that he would be willing to do that. But I am sorrowful that my sin ever put Jesus Christ on the cross. But I am resplendent in joy.
It's your fault. Your sins
so much that he would want to save me despite that.
To think that Jesus had to die on the cross 2,000 years ago because of your sin when you're born 2,000 years later is a weird guilt type of thing where you feel like you're like indebted. And you you owe him because he did this. It's a weird like psychological control to like get you on board to believing this thing. That's how I see it.
Adam, is there suffering in this world?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I don't believe that there's a God.
Why do you think Jesus came then?
Well, he didn't end suffering.
He is going to, though. That's why I believe in
him. And he conquered the devil.
Tear, right?
He came, he conquered the devil, but there's still sin, there's still suffering, and he's got to come back to finish the job. He's just waiting until enough hell, nation against nation, wars, famines, plagues, Armageddon, and then he'll come down and save us from the clouds. That's what we're hoping for. Trust the plan. Trust the Jewish plan. We're going to win with the Jewish superhero. That's what I trust
the plan because he rose from the dead once, and he's most certainly going to come back. I don't trust in vain things.
Trust in what things?
Sorry. I don't know if you heard me. I don't trust in vain things.
Vain things.
Right? Something I was going to say is you cited that verse from 1 Corinthians 15, no doubt, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, what do you think about that compared to Ephesians 6:12, in which still the same St. Paul says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." So doesn't it make sense there that corresponding with that verse in Ephesians, he's not talking about, we're wrestling with Gentile flesh and blood, Gentile rulers, but we're wrestling with, again, the devil, this sin, all these things.
Well, yeah, they say, Paul says that Paul doesn't say Jesus was crucified by Pilate. He said it was by the archons of this eon. So that does represent Satan. They thought that all the pagan kings and the pagans, that they're worshiping demons and Satan. So yeah, it's kind of the same thing, but it's still, I mean, you're not going to dispute that the purpose of the Messiah is to conquer kings, conquer the kings of Gentile nations, just like Joseph conquered the Pharaoh in Egypt.
Well, I don't dispute that Jesus wants to conquer every single heart, both Jew and Gentile, right? Because does Jesus currently reign in the hearts of most practicing rabbinical Jews today? No, he doesn't. He wants to conquer their hearts too, right? That's the conquering going on. He wants to conquer every unbelieving heart.
He wants to conquer them, but Paul says that they were hardened. God hardened their eyes and blinded them to the truth, because that's his plan, apparently. And that the Christians were brought in by their obedience, by the Jews' disobedience, the Christians could be saved. And the Christians being saved will make the Jews jealous so that they eventually believe in Jesus one day. Like, it's so inextricably linked, Christians and Jews. This is all just like, you're stuck, in my point of view, Christians are the other side of the kosher coin, stuck in the Judeo paradigm, arguing over who the Jewish Messiah is. It just all seems so kosher to me.
I wouldn't agree. I don't think that you've provided, I mean, because it's kind of this whole thing of just like, oh, well, you go along with the Jews. Okay, well, I cite again before. Now, I know your retort was you oppose Judaism for different reasons than a pagan would. But I think when we look at the historical record, whether we've been more tolerant or whether we've, physically opposed the Jews, right? We've been more successful at opposing the plan of Judaism than even antagonistic pagans, right? So I cite that, right?
The Jews are back in Israel. They're one of the most they're a nuclear power. They've got huge control with their lobbies and through religion over the most powerful country in the world, America. They're doing really well according to their plan. And this was the plan all along. Like what I just said about there, we talked about dominion, authority, and power. And you said, oh, that's just defeating the devil, not all the Gentile nations. What about Daniel 7? Jesus is the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. This is what Daniel 7 says. In my vision at night, I looked, and therefore before me was the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the ancient days, was led to his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All Goyim and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Again, It's about conquering the Goyim. That's the point of the Messiah, conquering the Goyim.
Every nation, tongue, everyone worships him, right?
Right. Everybody worships the King of the Jews. That's why Christians are just as much of a danger and a threat as rabbis, because you both want the same thing. All the world worshiping the Jewish God according to the Hebrew scriptures.
So I have a good question then. Why recently, and sorry if I'm mispronouncing, but the Knesset, right? The Jewish, Israel Senate, essentially. Was there a plan?
Yeah.
Oh, what was the pronunciation?
It's the Knesset, yeah.
Knesset.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm
It's
awful in
weird.
other languages.
Yeah, it looks like it would be silent, but it's not. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So in that senatorial chamber, right? Why was there recently, by the most avowed, supportive of the goals of Judaism, right? I believe it was the Likud party, right? Why did they put forward a entire bill to ban the gospel?
Because they consider Christianity.
If we're the perfect, scapegoat and the perfect in their plan, that doesn't make any sense.
Is that trying to ban Christianity in America?
You also claimed earlier that they view Christianity in a positive way because it takes away the weak Jews, right? So wouldn't they want the weak Jews in Israel to be kind of separated, the wheat from the chaff, and then all they got is wheat and no longer any weak Jews that are unbelieving?
Well, that still is happening, and that is a big concern for Jews. They can't stand Jews for Jesus proselytizing to Jews in Israel. That's what the bill was about, which was just saying you can't proselytize to Jews because they only want Jews in Israel. But you don't see Netanyahu and Likud or Dennis Prager or Ben Shapiro trying to outlaw Christianity in America. No, they encourage Christianity in America. Shabbos Goy, Zionist, Disinfo, Super Nazis, Alex Jones is killing Jesus every day, just like Prager does, just like John Hagee does. It's the greatest way for them to get support is through Christianity today.
Except they are only okay with Protestant Christianity that says that they don't need to be converted.
No, they're fine with the Catholic Church nowadays and recent popes.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So actively, like for instance, in recent years, the most active opponents of one of the more modern popes, Pope Pius XII, every writer that tries to demonize him, well, not every single one, but most writers that try to demonize him are all Jews, right? So they're totally okay with the Catholic Church, right? Not
every Jew is going to be totally okay with everything in the Catholic Church. That's not the point I'm making.
But again, this whole debate, it seems to be you want it both ways. When I show you an example of a very clear example of Jews very, very, very opposed to the Catholic Church, saying things like abortion is a Jewish sacrament and seeing, the church as the greatest enemy of that, right? Mm-hmm. And I cite that for it. You're like, oh, well, not every Jew is going to get along. But then, even when I show, okay, well, these supportive ones are okay with the certain version of, certain heretical version of Christianity that says you don't need to convert, you don't need to change, you don't need to, be a part of the church or whatever. Like both those are operating for the plan. Again, I don't see this, brother. I think this is just a self-serving bias that you've created.
You don't think that having the Roman Empire abandon their pagan worship for the God of Israel, you don't see how that benefits the Jewish agenda?
No, because at the same time,
the whole goal of the Old Testament was the nations will worship the God of Israel.
Theodosius was not supportive of Judaism. He was not supportive of Judaism, right?
Right. That was the stage where they're meant to be persecuted. The Jews are supposed to go into exile and be persecuted. That's the way that their script and their story was. The 2,000 year the exile of Edom in Rome or the Roman Empire.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I understand that. But then when I cite examples of, again, pagans persecuting them, you're like, oh, well, that's not.
They did. I know. I acknowledge that pagans did persecute them, but I'm saying they persecuted them for legitimate reasons. Christians persecute them in ways that only play into their victim status, make us the villains, and give them the moral upper hand. Do you not see that if your problem with Jews is that they they rejected Jesus, that's the wrong reason to criticize Jews. That only undermines opposition to Jews. It ultimately benefits them because it's a bad reason for criticizing them.
Because I think Jewish opposition to Christianity would be higher than even paganism, because paganism, they can easily look at and say, look at those dumb goyim, right? Look at those dumb goyim. They worship idols. They have temple prostitutes. They do these ridiculous sacrifices and these dances and all other manner of rituals that don't make any sense. But then when they have someone come along who is a scandal to many, who divides households and what have you, and he fulfills everything that the Old Testament promises, that's a real threat to them. That's a real threat to their power. That's why the Pharisees didn't like Jesus.
No, they see Christianity as a proto-Noahide religion. They see it as God's plan. They see it as the Christians did the job of spreading the Torah around the world. They worship the God of Israel. They're monotheistic. Besides, the Trinity is the only problem they have with it. That they always say, I've got clip after clip of rabbis saying, oh, Christianity brought a lot of good to the world. It used to be pagan, but now they worship the God of Israel and they believe in our book. And they believe, they're our greatest. What?
Right. You cite Moses. What's his last name again?
Maimonides.
Maimonides.
Yeah.
Maimonides. Okay. Maimonides.
Yeah.
Right. Who came way after the time of Jesus. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
12th century. Yeah.
Right. 12th century. Mm-hmm. How is it when you deny?
Hold on. Wait. Let him finish.
Wait. When you deny the historicity of the Gospels, when the apostles would have been well trained in Greek and Jewish repetition of like facts and stuff like that to remember,
they were fishermen.
Very common, right? But then say this guy in the 12th century is like purporting a true prophecy, definitely didn't retcon it, right? All the way in the 12th century to make sense of the reason why modern rabbinical Judaism isn't favored anymore. That's a self-serving bias. I think
I don't.
The guy, right? I'll just say that the guy
Rambam,
made that up so that he could make sense of why Judaism was no longer favored, right?
You're saying Maimonides was just coping when he said that Christianity and Islam are part of God's plan.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't need Maimonides to see that it's obvious that it's working for the benefit of God's plan, which God's not real. It's just the Jewish plan because they're the ones that wrote the book that supposedly describes them. Even in Acts, it says, and the Jerusalem church decided Paul would go to the Gentiles and make them basically Noahide believers. That's what this is about. If the whole goal of the Old Testament is that the nations would worship the God of Israel and Christianity did that, I don't need Maimonides to tell me that that's accomplished that goal. And I don't think you're being honest when it's obvious the Old Testament is about all the nations worshiping the God of Israel. He wants to destroy idol worship and have everybody worship the God of Zion. That's the goal. We agree on that. Christianity did that. You worship the God of Zion, but you think that's the way God wanted it. I think it's a Jewish deception.
How is it that God tells Peter in a dream, okay, Peter, now kill and eat, right? And demands that for the Jews who convert to Christianity? How is it that, this Council of Jerusalem demands that both Jew and Gentile no longer practice circumcision or the law as life-giving? And that the whole understanding of Jesus rebuking the Pharisees is, do you think the law will save you? It won't, right? Can you keep the law of Moses? You can't. And you need my grace to save you, right? That doesn't coincide with the Jewish plan. That because I understand the Jews are the Gentiles. Then they don't have to obey the rabbinical law because of course they're Gentiles, right? Doesn't coincide with that. But it seems very counterintuitive again to Jews.
It was
our demand. Yeah. So you prove
antithetical to Judaism. The Jews are taught no matter what until the end, you follow the mitzvahs, you follow the commandments. You don't engage in idol worship, which is believing a man is God, is idol worship. These are all things that make Christianity wasn't created for Jews. It was created for Gentiles. Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles. Half of the New Testament is written by him. You got the Great Commission and the centurion being the best believer and the Jews are the enemy. It's a religion, a Jewish religion for the Gentiles. That's what Christianity was. And that's why it's antithetical, because it's a controlled opposition. Yeah.
It wasn't created for Jews, yet some of the largest amount of early converts are all Jews. That doesn't make any sense. And they're also demanded to no longer follow the law that the Pharisees had that later became the Talmud. That doesn't add up, big dog.
Paul was the first one that took it to the Gentiles. That's what he innovated with his version. The Jesus
but I'm not talking about the Gentiles. I'm talking about Jews here, big dog.
You're talking about like the Ebionites and the Nazarenes and the pre-Pauline Christians that were Torah observant Jews, right?
Say that one more time.
You're talking about the pre-Paul Christian sects, Ebionites, Nazarenes that were Torah observant. That's what you're talking about.
I am talking about the fact that the Council of Jerusalem expressly for Jews too, not just Gentiles, Jews too, who accept Christ can no longer practice circumcision and Jewish dietary law as life-giving. That is like anathema in Judaism. You can't do that.
No, it says that, who was it? Peter would go be the apostle to the Jews. He wasn't telling them to not circumcise. He says the apostle to the circumcised, in fact. Paul considered himself a Jew. He was circumcised. He didn't even consider himself really starting a new religion. He thought he was just fulfilling God's plans of making the nations worship the God of Israel by being proto-Noahites. That was his goal. Having the Messiah reign over the nations.
That doesn't make any sense with historiography, Adam. Jews who converted to Christianity weren't allowed to practice circumcision. That was expressly condemned. They were called the Judaizers during the Council of Jerusalem. They were regarded as one of the first heresies, right? And then Paul writes about how, Abraham was justified by faith and not following the law. That's totally counterintuitive to modern rabbinical Judaism. So
modern Judaism
how is that aiding in
much later
Jewish world domination?
Excuse me?
Oh, sorry. How is that aiding in the plan for Jewish world domination when you're telling Jews don't observe the law that you need to observe to be saved?
Well, there's always been Jews that have not done that. They'd say, "What? Don't observe the law? That's all we're supposed to do as Jews, observe the law." They didn't do it. It didn't work. They're still Jews. They're still circumcising. Because that's what they're supposed to do. They're keeping their covenant, and they consider Christianity idolatrous.
Yeah, so if they consider Christianity idolatrous, wouldn't it not make sense for Jewish converts to Christianity that they would have to give up those practices that are necessary for salvation?
Yeah. The Jews that have fallen for Christianity are falling for the trap. This is what they view, that Christianity is a temptation to satanic idol worship. This is the Jewish perspective, and that the Jews that fall for Christianity are being they're being tempted, and they've fallen for the temptation, and that's God's way of weeding out the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, the souls that aren't destined for the world to come.
So they're doing a good job. They're doing a good job separating the weak Jews from the strong Jews by completely outlawing the gospel to be preached in Israel, which, according to your view,
this is 2,000 years later. This is 2,000 years later.
Your view of their plan would allow the weak Jews to be separated from the strong Jews.
And again, this was like what, two Jews in the Knesset that decided this. Netanyahu didn't let this go through.
Okay, that's fine.
Some Jews today, some politicians in Israel today wanting to pass a law that Christians can't proselytize to other Jews in Israel, it has no bearing on what was going on 2,000 years ago, or like even just a generation after the first generation of Christians.
But again, we even go back again. I would go back to other examples where Jews were specifically okay even living under Muslim rule, as long as it did not mean that Christians spread the gospel to them and allowed for their communities to be broken up. Right. They had some glory years under Islam, and they also believe I think Islam's a Jewish creation as well.
They play the role of Ishmael. Christians play the role of Esau, and rabbis believe both are Noah. Islam is more Noahide compliant than Christianity because they believe in the oneness of God. They don't believe in any idolatrous man is God stuff. And they believe in all the Jewish patriarchs. They believe that they're from Abraham. They're part of the Abraham Accords. They're part of the Abrahamic matrix. I got to run, take a quick bathroom break.
That's totally fine, brother.
That's cool. Go ahead, and then I'll try to find one for him, and then we'll come back and read the rest and do some final thoughts.
I thought we were an hour and a half in. We're 2.5.
Yeah, I know. It's been flying by. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and take a break.
I just moved and realized how numb my legs were.
Yeah.
I'll be back.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, now.
Yeah, we've been sitting here for a long time.
Yeah, we have, and I thought it would be quicker, but it was going pretty well. And a debate like this, it's a good sign. I don't really have to step in that much. They're having a good conversation on their own. That's what we want on the Killstream. So here's a question for you. Is it okay, and this is from Fard Balloon with a 10 spot. He says, is it okay to call God Jehovah? I was raised a witness, so the name stuck with me, and I always thought it was a nice name.
Yeah, so it's very interesting with, and I'm saying this God's name here for demonstration, but the name Yahweh or Jehovah, there's an understanding that you don't sin by using God's name. There's no mortal sin so long as you're not using it in vain. However, there was a letter from the Vatican to America that said it's traditionally customary to avoid using God's name, just because it's a sign of greater respect for his name, right? Because it's like back in the day, Isaiah, Daniel, the prophets wouldn't have said God's name directly, right? Like out in public. So it's a way to show respect.
All right, now let's see. There's Caesar says, good job, Pinesap. You're like a catechism personified.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah,
I love
kind.
Caesar Says. He's a great guy.
Very kind. Yeah, I love him too. Good supporter of the show. I appreciate that. By the way, the streak's on the line, 72% of the way there, like $97 or so. So we'll see if we hit it. We'll hold it open a little bit. But if you want to get some questions in, get them in now. And also, we got a couple callers, I think. Raise your hand if you want to call in. T.me/TheRalphRetort. Anonymous says, why are all the former Christian nations ruled by them now? That's a little opaque. Ruled by Christians or ruled by them? Like, I'm not. I guess there's two different ways to take that. But anybody want to take that?
Oh, as in like why are former Christian nations now ruled by Jews?
Well, yeah, I mean that's kind of what I thought he meant, but I don't know if that's what he meant or not.
Well, I mean, what I would say is, the fact is that Enlightenment ideology spread to these nations, undermining the Christian core, and it was very, very hard in Catholic nations. Because you see, like with journals like La Civiltà Cattolica, which translates from Italian into Catholic civilization, this real opposition to the Enlightenment spirit and what have you. But in a lot of these Protestant nations, and to sort of a lesser extent, but they still held out pretty well, Eastern Orthodox countries, the Enlightenment really would take root, right? Really, really took root, because what they would do is, Protestants like biblical criticism that cast doubt on real miracles in the Bible and stuff like that easily lended itself towards things like atheism and secularity and what have you, kind of the epistemology of like Luther, where it's like every man's essentially his own. And I know this is kind of a little bit of a straw man of Luther, but like every man can interpret scripture and stuff like that, lend itself to the same individualism that then led to the Christian core of these nations being, undermined, and then thus paved the way for, Jewish supremacy.
Go ahead, Adam. Did you want to add on that one, or just want me to keep going?
Sure, yeah, they're thriving in Christian nations because the Christians are all feeling guilty today, and because they were able to be preserved, and because it's hard to compete with somebody granting them the idea that they're God's chosen people. Even if you believe that they were ever God's chosen people, I don't think it's a coincidence that they have so much power when a religion, the the most popular and dominant religion in the last 2,000 years, views them as God's chosen people, and then they have all this power, I think it's pretty obvious it's because of Christianity.
All right, just about 900 people watching live on cozy.tv/EthanRalph and rumble.com. Let's see here. Midlife Groper says Ralph wins. I appreciate that. I'll take that.
Ralph wins.
I appreciate
I'm trying to avoid the Ralph curse.
Yeah. Me too. All right, Anonymous. Anonymous said, question to Adam, has anyone pointed out the irony of you looking a lot like Jesus? I've heard that, yeah. When I first saw your Twitter profile, I thought it was supposed to be cartoon Jesus.
Have you seen any of the fun I've been having with the AI, Ralph?
Yeah, I have, actually,
Twitter?
Yeah. You're kind of like an AI master. I saw some of the pictures that you had produced there. So, yeah, I saw the one with you with the lion, and then I saw Trump meeting Netanyahu, and there were several others that I was looking at. Yeah, I saw that.
I did one as me as white Jesus.
Yeah, I saw that one too. It's spooky, honestly. Yeah. Didn't you say you just typed in white Jesus and that was what they gave you or something like that? I don't know if you used your photo or not, but it was spot on.
Yeah, I used my photo.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And swapped my face in.
I saw it, though. It definitely did. It looked a little eerie there. All right, Cookies says he's giving you time to repent. And then he said dummy, which is rude. Then he said, hurry up. All right. Spexo says, Adam, if you're so against Jews, why are you determined to spend eternity in hell with them? That was from Spexo. You can respond if you want, but they're kind of statements more or less there. Anonymous says, Pinesap, what kind of God has a master plan that calls for his own son to be tortured and sacrificed to atone for the imperfection of beings that he created?
Good question.
Yeah, so I don't know if this anonymous person listened to the earlier part of the debate where I addressed that, but the whole idea in Christian theology is essentially that there's this state that human beings are in of original sin, right? And the suffering of the world and what have you, and then we need to be reached out of it. But then it comes to the question of like, why would God the Father send Jesus to suffer and die on the cross? Isn't that way unjust? But what's missing from that is the understanding that Jesus didn't have to do any of that. And when I say didn't have to do any of that, I don't mean like, oh, Jesus didn't have to do any of that, but God the Father said, you're going to go do that. No, Jesus could have very easily just said, okay, I snapped. He didn't even need to snap his fingers, but he's like, I snapped my fingers and the gates of heaven are opened and all is reconciled. But the beauty of the incarnation is that Jesus came down in our flesh to suffer for our sake, to experience our suffering, to have empathy with us, to love us and know exactly what we're dealing with to even a greater extent than oftentimes we deal with in our own lives. He suffered so much only out of his free will and his free choice. He wasn't condemned to earth to die. It's not like The Last Temptation of Christ by Martin Scorsese, where Jesus has just asked this of God the Father, but it's that Jesus willingly, by his own will, chooses to offer himself up for our sake in the flesh of man and suffer these rebukes and these humiliations, because in order to love us so much, he wanted to experience our plight, human suffering. Like the whole philosophical problem of human suffering and if, why do good people suffer? Why is there evil in this world is answered in the beauty of Jesus saying, I've come down in the flesh, not because I had to, not because God the Father condemned me to, but because I am choosing to suffer for your sake because I love you so much. And I want to have that empathy to experience your suffering, even on a deeper level than you ever will, right?
All right, now let me see here. Bob H says total Chad Zap W. Bob H then says total Big Dog L. Then Anonymous says, Adam, were the Gospels written by super Jews psyop sergeants or simple, I respect the alliteration there, super Jews psyop sergeants or simple fishermen that knew two languages? You need to switch back and forth when convenient. Am enjoying the conversation. Salute to both. Thank you for that. Any thoughts there, Adam?
I think it was most likely. One problem is that we don't know who the authors of the Gospels were because they didn't get named until Irenaeus in 180 AD. and lost my track of mind now. Oh, who wrote the Gospels? I think it was very educated Alexandrian Jews, and the Alexandrian Jews also were connected to the Essene communities in Qumran, and I think that it formed out of that. There's been people that speculate that the Ebionites or the Nazarenes came out of the Essenes. The Essenes also had a group of 12, and when Paul says Jesus first came to Cephas, and then the 12, and then the 500, which isn't in the other Gospels, the 500 that he appeared to. But I think that's probably who wrote it. Alexandrian Jews. They were Hellenized, kind of like Philo. He was a Pharisee that read the Torah esoterically and kind of syncretized Hellenistic, Platonic beliefs into Judaism.
Insurgent Honor says, I think we're all in opposition to Jewish supremacy. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a big reason Jews respect Jesus is because he shows no partiality, and in him Jews and Gentiles become one body, and Christ alone is supreme. I see you shaking your head, Pinesap, so I'll let you go first on that, and then Adam can pick it up.
So let me just make sure I read the super chat correctly. He's saying the reason that there is Jewish opposition to Christianity is because there is no partiality in terms of Jew or Gentile.
So, well, I'll just read it again. He says, I think we're all in opposition to Jewish supremacy. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a big reason Jews reject Jesus is because he shows no partiality, and in him Jews and Gentiles become one body, and Christ alone is supreme.
Yep, 100%. 100%. And this was one of the whole problems with that the Pharisees had with Jesus, because they were scandalized because the Pharisees, what does Jesus say about them? They take up the first seat in the synagogue. They pray in the marketplace. They, in his parable, he gives the, example of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And the Pharisee says, Lord, I thank you for not making me like other men, right? Not like other men. I'm set apart. I'm special, right? But then Jesus gives this image of the tax collector that says, Lord, I only beg your mercy. I'm no better than any other man, right? And the fact that there isn't this like pride in oneself, but there's this humility before God who loves us, I think is a big stumbling block to rabbinical Jews.
Go ahead, Adam. Did you want to add in on that?
Yeah, I don't agree that Christians are against Jewish supremacy, because they want the Jewish God to rule over the earth. They follow the King of the Jews, the Torah Jewish Messiah that came to the Jews, that only the Jews were waiting for. The whole idea of a Messiah and redemption is a messianic idea. So no, Christians believe in all of that. So they're not opposing Jewish supremacy. In fact, they're enabling codependents and apologists for Jewish supremacy, because they refuse to condemn and oppose the Torah, which is the root of all Jewish supremacy.
All right, now there's another one. Hot dogs for sale says, and I'm going to take some calls, so keep your hand raised. We are going to jet through a few of them, but if you want in there, get in there now. And I am going to go to calls as soon as we finish these last few. And, of course, they keep coming in, so that's another reason why I haven't got to the calls yet. But we will. And I'm trying to be mindful of time here, too. Hot Dogs for Sale says, so, Adam, we don't like Jews just because they crucified Jesus? There's a little more to it than that. Let's get St. Simon of Trent's opinion on this. Pinesap, please opine. And then he said, pun intended. And then he did ask Pinesap to opine directly on Simon of Trent's opinion, if you have an opining.
It's the biggest reason.
Were you going to say something, Adam?
No, go ahead. I just wanted to throw that in before.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, no. I mean, there was that whole book. Oh man, I can't remember. So the whole thing with like the whole Jewish blood libel is, it's kind of a mixed case, because the popes did condemn this as like a wider conspiracy going on in all Jewish communities, which the historiography proves that wasn't the case, right? It wasn't going on in all Jewish communities. But however, historical research, Adam, you might remember actually the name of this book. What was the name of the book that recently came out a couple of years ago that was very controversial, that was about Jewish blood libel? Do you remember that? I'm trying to.
Who wrote it? Did a Jew wrote it?
I think so, actually. And he lived in Israel and stuff like that. And he came out with this book and found that I think essentially in some Jewish circles, I think in Europe, like in Spain and stuff like that, like dried blood of Christians and stuff like that was traded around, and it was popular amongst some Hasidic communities. So there's kind of a level of truth to where it was not performed by all Jews or necessarily most Jews, but there was a sect of Jews that did practice blood libel.
Chat's saying blood Passover. I haven't read it.
Yes. I've never read it too. I just remember the title of the book and that it was pretty scholarly, if I'm not mistaken.
All right, go ahead. Do you have anything else on that, Adam, or should I move on?
No, go ahead.
All right, cool. Anonymous says, Adam, why would super educated Jews you say wrote the Gospels blame themselves for the crucifixion?
Because that's what the prophecy said. It didn't actually happen. They formed the new myths based on the prophecies of the Old Testament. So there's stuff in Isaiah 53, right, that says that he was like hated by the world and his bore our afflictions and his death atoned and stuff like this. That's where it came from, that he would be rejected by his people. It's also in Wisdom of Solomon in other verses as well. That's where they got the idea to blame them. Also, if you're trying to create a controlled opposition dialectic, that helps.
And Sergeant Honor says, great debate, guys. Big 07 to Ralph for hosting. Salute to you as well. Content Renaissance Revival. Well, I feel back on track here after a little bit of a spring spent off track. So I do feel like this is a big marker in the return to form here. So I do thank both gentlemen. But we're not done yet. Okay, now let me take these callers, and I'll start in order with Spook House. Unmute yourself, sir. And they're more likely probably to be hostile to Mr. Green. I think that's probably... No. I don't know that for a fact, but...
Christians be hostile to...
I mean hostile to your argument. Now, we'll see if it's hostile. Go ahead, Spook House.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, my internet's been a little weird tonight. So I guess I have... I'm kind of an amateur in terms of theology.
Hold on, wait. Let me check this. Can you guys hear him? By the way, you can. Okay, all right, good. Sorry, I'm just making sure. Sorry, go ahead, Spook House, because I've had some issues with that.
Worries.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's all good. I was raised Jewish, and I completely understand Adam on a lot of things, because when I grew up, I was in a lot of Orthodox synagogues, and that's some messed up shit, to put it bluntly. A lot of Talmudic influence, things of that nature, right? And so I would say now, I guess the closest thing I can align with is reform. What I wanted to pose to Adam, because I've been listening to you on 3 or 4 other debates, and I was wondering, are you familiar with Two Dogmas of Empiricism by Willard Van Orman Quine?
No.
Okay. So I was like a very strict empiricist pragmatist, philosophically speaking. What I was going to say is take a look at that paper. I'm not saying, oh, you need to believe in God, but it's well worth taking that if you're still, citing Big Bang in arguments. I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong. I'm just saying take a look at it.
Remember, I don't know if you heard, but I didn't say I believed in the Big Bang. I think, if anything, the universe would be eternal. I believe in an eternal universe, not an eternal Jewish God.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. That makes a little more sense then. My apologies.
No worries.
And Pinesap, what I was curious about is I listened to a fair bit of Jay Dyer, and I listened to a lot of Orthodox apologism, because I think you should look into all faiths. Why, in your case, why Catholicism? Because you made some fantastic arguments, or at least I like your argumentation, but I'm curious what drew you to that.
Oh, man, dude, a lot of things. If you're willing, could I share a story with you that kind of illustrated like a larger problem?
It's up to Ralph.
Yeah, go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, so in Vladimir Solovyev's book, Russia and the Universal Church, which beautiful book. I hope Vladimir Solovyev is canonized. He shares a story about an Anglican who is very ecumenical named William Palmer. And William Palmer, it was very customary in kind of the late 19th century for Anglicans to take a huge interest in like Eastern Christianity. And I think part of that was due to like the British Empire's dominion kind of going into Greece a little bit at that time. But I think also the communication allowed for them to access this whole part of Europe that they weren't very familiar with. And so William Palmer becomes very interested in Eastern Orthodox, and he's like, wow, this is crazy. He's like, this is way more like patristic and old and ancient than Anglicanism. Clearly it is, right? And so he goes to the East to actually convert. And so at first he goes to Greece, and he says, and he meets with like a bunch of Greek priests, and they say, well, your baptism's invalid. You have to be completely rebaptized. You have to, your baptism was done by heretics. And if you're going to be a part of the true Greek Orthodox Church, you got to be completely rebaptized, chrismated, everything. Now, Palmer, probably studying the fathers quite a bit, and the Donatist controversy with St. Augustine, in which St. Augustine affirmed the validity of the Donatist baptism, said, yeah, no, that's ridiculous, right? So he goes up to Russia, and he goes up to Russia probably expecting the same answer, I would imagine, right? But then he goes up to Russia, and the answer he gets is, oh, no, your baptism is valid. You just need to be chrismated, right? He's like, wait a minute. So the Greeks say I need to be, like, all the sacraments that I've ever received are all invalid. But then the Russians affirm that my baptism is correct, but I just need to be chrismated. And then he went, being scandalized by this and seeing that there was no consistency amongst the reception of converts. He goes to Rome and he's like, what do I need to do? And they're like, oh, well, your baptism was valid. It was done in the Trinitarian formula, and you just need to be confirmed and received into the church. So at that moment, William Palmer became a Roman Catholic. So that story, the reason I bring it up is because it's indicative of a larger problem in Eastern Orthodoxy. They are completely inconsistent. They don't have any defined ecclesiology. Their epistemology is all over the place. And it's kind of a vain assertion of, oh, we appeal to the fathers. But then when I see in the fathers, and I see in patristics in the first 1,000 years of the church, things like, oh, here's St. Maximus affirming papal infallibility. Here's, Pope St. Gelasius saying the papacy is over synod and stuff like that. Suddenly it's not so patristic and, oh, they were actually wrong and Rome's in error. So the inconsistency of Eastern Orthodoxy, I don't think would ever be representative of the true faith, but the consistency we get in Catholicism is from on high and from Almighty God. I hope that answers your question, brother, and I could speak hours about this topic.
Oh, I appreciate the answer. Like I said, I'm very new to all this, and I do appreciate you sharing that. It always guides my research. I was raised not to hate anybody, which I know sounds a little weird, and I was not raised under Talmudic Judaism, although my father always kind of encouraged me to look into it. He's not a practitioner either. I guess what I'm trying to wonder is, like Laura Loomer, America First, but Jewish, I guess I would fall under that. I'm trying to figure out, is there a way that we can kind of keep a coalition? I believe we have to clean house, at least for my own people, because Lachad Lubavitch, holy crap, that's scary as shit. That's got to go. I don't care who you are. But I'm trying to figure out, is there a way to form a coalition? Or do you believe that can be reached across aisles, at least temporarily?
Well, I think Laura Loomer is a fantastic woman, and she's very kind and has been very supportive of our cause. And certainly there have been examples of Jews who have been very, very, very kind to Catholics and stuff like that, and even sort of supportive of the Catholic cause. But I would still like to, I think, incentivize those Jews towards just reaching the truth, reaching the fulfillment of the Old Testament, which is Catholicism, right? Not out of any antipathy or hatred or, oh, I can't stand you or anything like that, or any sort of secret reviling, but as a means of love. Because, ultimately, and I don't know if this has been properly represented during this conversation, I know some people might mock me, but I do love the Jews. And because I love the Jews, I want them to become Catholic, and I want them to be, in the same kingdom of heaven as I am, right? And so I think the best way to do that is helping the Jews become Catholic and be reconciled with the church and Almighty Jesus Christ, who has always wanted them,
Caller, thank you. If you have another couple of
Thank you,
quick
Mal.
things
Have
to
a good
say.
evening. God bless.
Thank you, man.
God bless, brother.
Appreciate it. All right. Any more callers want to get in? Get in now. Mike, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great.
What's up, Mike?
Awesome. I kind of caught bits and pieces, but I got to preface what I have to ask Adam by saying, firstly, Pinesap won. And secondly, I was going to, I'm going to preface this also by saying is that what I've picked from Adam's, from his arguments is that he seems very of the mindset of the Jews of the time, where they're like, we want to, I'm not saying he wants a Messiah necessarily, but that idea of, if you're really the Messiah, come down from the cross. If you're, he wants that like someone like Thor, for example, like this, like might makes right kind of character. And I think it's like wrong to think that way, because that's not, love is not just, conquest. It's not just like being this warrior, but to keep it brief, what I wanted to ask Adam, is there anything that you have changed your mind on since talking to Pinesap?
No.
Fortunate, huh?
Caller, do you have Yeah, I figured that'd probably be. But go ahead. Do you have another question or a follow up to that?
Okay. It seems like I'm actually kind of not surprised by that answer. It seems like the arguments you've kind of made are in very bad faith. They're just like, oh, you're reading into that. Oh, is that a win? I really have to I ask you this question, after the blood of the martyrs for a good 500 years after Christ, the blood of the martyrs caused, the Roman Empire to go from paganism to Catholicism. And I want to ask you, when you say, is that a win, where's your idea of winning at? Really, if you think about it, they won souls by converting people to the Catholic Church through that love, it's caritas, laying your life down for your brothers. When you say, did you really win? Do you really think converting in the entirety of civilized world to Catholicism, is that not a win?
The Jews consider it a win for them. Their biggest win. And also you mentioned Jesus not coming down from the cross. The Jews mocked him supposedly when he was on the cross. No, that actually didn't happen. That's a myth written from scripture. Also, Wisdom of Solomon 2:18 says, for if the just man be the son of God, he will help him and deliver him from the hand of his enemies. But let us condemn him with a shameful death. Such things they did imagine and were deceived, for their own wickedness hath blinded them. As for the mysteries of God, they knew them not. This is Wisdom of Solomon, a very popular pre-Christian Jewish text, is where they got that idea of Jesus come down from the cross from there, straight from it.
Caller.
And if we're talking about, Christian martyrs, so Christianity's real because of martyrs, well, then does that make Muslim martyrs? Does that make Islam real? Do Jews that refuse to become conversos and pretend to accept Jesus, that the one that they were killed, does that mean that they're real? They love to talk about their martyrs and their persecution and their suffering, and they use that as proof that their religion is real also. So I see that as a terrible argument.
Caller, thank you. I appreciate you calling in.
Yeah, no worries. I hope you convert, and I hope you stop. I hope you forgive your father, honestly, because you sound like you're projecting your hatred of your father onto the Christian faith. I hope you convert. We love you, but seriously, knock it off and grow up. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. All right, now we have other callers. I'm going to try to take them in order. I see Spexo in there as well. Insurgent Honor, unmute yourself, please, and go through with your call.
Hey, guys. Hey.
Hello.
Everybody hear me good?
Yep.
Awesome. So it's been a great debate, and I kind of want to follow up on the super chat that I sent in, because Adam's answer was that Christians do show partiality, or Christians are for partiality, and then he tried to use the Old Testament to validate that. But I kind of think maybe what's going on here is there's some crossover between what's written in the Talmud and like reinterpreting that into the Old Testament. But you've got to understand that Christians, the way we read the Old Testament, is we see that the Old Testament is fulfilled in Christ. So if there's something in the Old Testament that maybe was misunderstood, we see that as fully interpreted and revealed in Jesus. And the New Testament is abundantly clear that there's no partiality. Even the Jews, when they were talking with Jesus, they said, we see that you're a teacher of the law and that you're a good man and that you show no partiality. And you can look back in the Old Testament that says, where God's law explicitly says you shall not pervert justice and not show partiality. So I think what I agree with Adam on, where I'm like jumping up and down and cheering, is this Jewish supremacy thing. And again, like, they rejected Jesus because he didn't bring the kingdom that they wanted, that smashed the goy and put them in charge to rule the world.
But he will when he comes back, according to the scriptures.
Yes, he will. He will, but it's not for Jews over Gentiles. It's for those who are in Christ versus those who reject Christ. And it's been that way since the beginning. It's that way in every facet of life, whether you're talking about religion or not. I mean, the leaders that we look up to are the ones who are exemplary, the ones who, abide by the law, who have the best morals, who live the best life. We all point to these people as the exemplary ones, and the ones that don't behave that way are trash. We all agree with that.
Go ahead, Adam, if you want to respond.
Yeah, I want to respond. He said that you believe Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. That's what I'm saying too. Can you see my share screen?
Yes, I can.
Is that working okay?
Yeah, it's a little hard to read, but it's showing up.
All right, just real quick. Luke 24 says, Jesus is speaking, and he says, everything must be filled that is written about me in the law of Moses. That's the Torah, and the prophets. That's the Tanakh, and the Psalms. So let's read a little Psalms now. I have Psalm 2. Why do the Goyim conspire? I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. That's Jesus. From the Christian perspective, that's Jesus, the king on Zion. So that's why all Christians are Zionist. And it says here,
you will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. I will make the Goyim your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. Therefore, you Gentile kings, be wise. Be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. And that's Psalm 2:9, rule with an iron scepter. Move over to Psalm 22. Can you hear me in the God voice?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I can. Yeah, go ahead.
My God, why hast thou forsaken me? That's what Jesus said on the cross, supposedly. They quote mined it directly from that. Despised by the people, they laugh and scorn. They pierce my hands and feet. Fulfillment of the Psalms, right here. All the ends of the world shall remember and turn unto the Lord, and all the kindreds of the Goyim shall worship before thee. For the kingdom is the Lord's, and he is the governor among the nations. All the world will turn to Hashem. The kindreds of the Goyim shall bow down and worship before thee. He is the governor over the Goyim.
Adam, you're being disingenuous by reading the word Goyim in where it says nations. And we redefine that word Goyim to mean
yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. You cover it up. Exactly.
All right, hold on. Let him
And
finish. Go ahead.
That's completely disingenuous. What he's talking about is the nations, and the nations are the world systems that are set up by the enemy, by Satan, who's the enemy of your soul, inasmuch he's also the enemy of my soul. He's the enemy of humanity, and the nations belong to him. And it's the Christian commission is to advance the kingdom by taking the nations back for Christ. That's what we're doing. And we do that by loving, by serving, and by compelling you to convert and no longer be ruled over by the nations, by the enemy. So when you read Goyim in there to make it mean something that it doesn't mean, I think I don't know if you're purposefully misinterpreting, or again, if you're reading the Talmud back into God's law.
It's you that's reading this the wrong way because you're in denial. It clearly says nations.
Caller, hold on. Caller, wait. Caller, wait.
Nations
Caller, wait.
means goyim.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, Adam.
Nations means goyim. And this is what Christians do. They make excuses for the Torah, for the supremacy in the Torah. This is why they're not against Jewish supremacy. It says right here, Psalms 22:28. He is the governor among the nations. Or I'm sorry. Kindred of the nations shall worship before thee. It says Goyim right there. Orthodox Jewish Bible. This is what Goyim means, is nations, the non-Jewish world. This is what Jesus, who says himself, he's being fulfilled in the Psalms. Here's Psalms 22. It's about making the nations worship him. And what does it say about the kings of the nations? Celebrate his rule with fear and trembling. There's other verses where it says the ruler of the nations will prostrate themselves and lick the dust in front of the Jews. It's all about Jewish supremacy. And this is the problem with Christians is, oh, you're rereading it wrong. And I've heard Christian Cope in the comments say, oh, nations, that just means that's the non-Christians are the nations. No, that is completely ridiculous.
All right, go ahead, caller. Give your final retort here.
Yeah. So look, I agree. The nations are going down. Christ is going to reign as king. Christ is reigning. All authority has already been given to him. He is king whether you or anyone else recognizes it or not, and everyone will bow down to him one day, and eventually that will happen. But I feel like you could be a strong ally for Christ if you stopped raging against his people as you rage against his enemy. You've made an enemy of both of us, and you need to pick a side. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, caller.
You've made me your enemy because I don't worship the God of Israel.
All right, now we have some more here and a couple super chats. Also, we're very close to the goal. I'm going to bring Spexo in first. Big Nick Show, you really should be next, and I'll get you right after this because I know you've been trying to get in there. But Spexo has a relationship to one of the guests. It just makes more sense. Go ahead. Of course, I mentioned that the callers were likely to be more heavily against Green, so that was stated as well. Go ahead, Spexo.
Hey, what's up? You guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's up, man?
What's up, buddy?
What's up, Ethan? Hey, Pinesap. Awesome job, bro. Ethan, thanks for hosting this. This was a great stream.
You're welcome.
I have a couple of things, if that's cool.
Sure.
Adam, I used to watch you in like 2016, 2017. It's very disappointing that you fell into this like Reddit tier pagan type thing, whatever you got going on. I'm not sure, but you seem to be like conflating Catholicism with all forms of Protestant Christianity. And like, it seems that you would say a statement where you misinterpret something or whatever, and then you would be corrected. And instead of like saying, oh, okay, you corrected my point, let's continue talking about this, you would just like divert and talk about another thing, you know? But I want to ask you though, what do you consider yourself? Are you a neo-pagan?
What verse have I misinterpreted that he corrected? What verse have I misinterpreted that he corrected?
No, I'm saying in general, like when you were taking things out of context to him asking a question or whatever, and then he would ask a question. I'm not saying specific things. I'm saying you would go on, you would change different topics. Like when he would say something about Israel.
That's the same excuse that the rabbis use, by the way.
Gentlemen, one at a time, please. Go ahead. Go ahead, Spexo. State what you said, and then he can answer, and then we'll go back to you.
That was just, I wasn't trying to make that part of the question, but for an example, when you would say like something about Israel, that's the chosen land or whatever, and he would say you're taking Israel out of context for what Israel means or whatever in the proper context, things of that nature. And then instead of addressing that, you moved on to a next topic. It was just a statement I was making. That's not part of the question.
But hold on, wait, hold on. I will go back. I'll let you get your whole question. Respond to that, okay, Mr. Green, if you want, or we can go to the question.
We had a disagreement over what Israel means. I'm aware Christians consider themselves the new Israel, which sounds completely cucked. It's just like, oh, we're the real Jews. You're spiritual Jews. The Pope says inside every Christian is a Jew. So I don't see how I was refuted on that.
All right, now go ahead, Spexo, with your question.
Okay, right. This is just like linguistics, but it's totally different meanings. We can get into a debate about that. But the question I wanted to ask, what do you consider yourself? Are you actually a pagan, or are people just calling you pagan?
No, I'm not a pagan. I believe in no pagan religions. Pagan isn't a religion. It's just all non-Jewish religions. Pagan is a derogatory term for anybody that doesn't worship the Jewish God.
Very Reddit answer, but okay. So do you have any type of religion, or what do you believe in?
No, I'm non-religious. I don't believe people that think that they speak for God.
So do you believe that there is a God?
I'm open that there's some type of higher power, but I haven't seen any good proof for it.
Okay, so you would consider yourself agnostic then?
Basically, yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry to hear that, but I mean, I guess it's kind of better than pagan, but still bad. But I really just don't understand this whole idea you have where you think that Jews came up with like this conspiracy to create Christianity, and so that they could be oppressed for 1,500 years and then like take power in the 20th century. Like
they were already oppressed before Christianity started too.
I didn't hear. I'm sorry. What'd you say? Was the first part?
They played the long game with this religious warfare, and look how they're doing today. It worked out well for them, didn't it? Christianity was opposed to Jews so much that how come only paganism got eradicated and Judaism's more powerful than ever?
How come only paganism got eradicated and Judaism is more powerful than ever? Jews are 2% of the world population, and we can go into detail of how they used subversion and the Enlightenment and all that stuff to gain power over
Christianity is the subversion. There's no better weapon.
Banking and all that stuff. I know all that stuff, but
tricking the goy that their God is real and that he chose them is the biggest psyop of all time.
But you're conflating like ethnic Ashkenazi Jews with the Jews of the Old Testament, and once again conflating Israel with the covenant of God, and just completely misinterpreting terms and thinking that Catholics believe the same things that Protestants believe about Israel and the Jewish people.
Catholics believe that they were chosen by God. They believe that and so is it the Jews of the Bible, the Jews of the Old Testament are good and only the Ashkenazis are bad?
Okay, the Ashkenazis and the Sephardic and all the other sects after the diaspora didn't exist before in Jesus's time. The tribe of Israel was interchangeably called Jews.
Where'd they come from?
Israel is the blessing of God of the old covenant. That's why we say we are the new Israel, because we have we inherited the eternal covenant of the old covenant. We are the new and eternal covenant. That's why we say we're the new Jews.
That's why you're completely kosher. You couldn't consider yourselves new Jews to believe.
But that's what I'm saying. You're saying Jews in like this new like 4chan, like the Jew control everything. I'm not saying Jews as in like the Jews controlling the world and all that. Saying I'm saying Jews as in Israelites, which means we have the blessing of God. We have a covenant with God. That's all Israel means. They take it out of term. And you also were using Goy and Gentiles. You know, Muslims also use those terms too. It's different depending on the context and what group of people you're talking about that are using those terms.
All right, go ahead.
And the Jewish interpretation of nations has always been the non-Jewish world, Goyim. So I'm interpreting that right. So if you're telling me I'm wrong about everything I expose about Jewish supremacy, and I just need to read the Torah the way the Catholics do, and then I won't see any problems with it. That's the problems with Catholics, is that they won't condemn the Torah, the root of the Talmud, the root of Jewish supremacy, the root of everything.
Okay, so I'm sorry, did I interrupt you? Go ahead.
No, I was done.
Okay, so prior to Christ coming and stuff, right? There was multiple different sects of Judaism, right? There was the Zealots, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, etc. Right? They all had the same law. What?
Essenes.
Essenes, right? They all had the same law, but they had different interpretations of it, and they had arguments, and they debated over what was the correct way to follow the true law of God, etc. Right? Christ came, and he was the fulfillment of that law to show them the proper way and what is the truth, the full truth, right? And that was to save all mankind, to eternalize the covenant forever, right? And he was to establish an eternal church, a physical, visible church on earth that would continue properly interpreting his teachings so that his people wouldn't be led astray into different sects again, right? Now, unfortunately, that has happened. They've broken off from the church, but that one true church is the continuation of that true covenant established by Christ himself.
All right, go ahead.
I don't see why you're so eager and desperate to like get in on the Jewish covenant. Like, I don't give a shit about their fake chosen covenant. But you seem so desperate to be like, oh, I want to be grafted in with that. It's like you want the Jews' sloppy seconds. If they didn't reject him, you wouldn't be saved. You're getting the scraps at the table like the dog in the Jesus story with the woman.
Okay. Once again, it's this idea of like the Jews of today that are like in international power and all that stuff are the Jews that are everywhere, and that's what we're talking about. The religion that modern Jews follow is not the same religion that was back then, right? It isn't. They're not.
They don't have their temple, but it's still based on the Torah.
Do you think that modern Talmudic rabbinical Judaism is the same as Old Testament Judaism was practiced before Christ?
Yeah, they say that the Pharisees were the predecessors to the modern rabbinical Talmudic Judaism, and they had an oral law back then too. It just wasn't written down yet.
Okay, right, but the oral law was written down now and explicitly mentions Jesus
only the
Christ.
Talmud's the problem. It's not the real Jews. It's only the fake Jews. It's not the Torah. It's the Talmud.
They no longer have a priest or a temple, and they're. What?
I said just criticize the Torah, but you can't do it.
So, okay, our position is that the Old Covenant Jews were were the Old Covenant, right? They were the old religion, right?
You believe when Jews Christ were chosen by God.
Hold on. When Christ came, he fulfilled it, right? He fulfilled it and told us the right way to follow it and establish the church, right? So if they continued following the old law after Christ came, they were no longer part of that covenant. They became the heretics, right? They were Jews. They were separate from the covenant of Christ. They were no longer part of Israel, right? They turned their back on Israel. And that's why Christ says, if you claim to be of my father, if you were of my father, you would listen to me. Your father is the devil. The people who were Jews, who were Israelites, who wouldn't accept Christ, those were the ones that would then become Jews, which we would interchangeably discuss that tribe prior to the diaspora and then after.
Mm-hmm. I see Beardson talking shit in the chat. Shut your fucking mouth, you little hobbit bitch. I'm not scared to debate you. You're just a fucking
good
idiot.
Talking to you, Adam. I will pray for you. I do hope you convert because I do think that you do have potential. I love you, Pinesap. I'll get together soon. Ethan, thank you for having me on. Bye.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. There goes Spixo. Okay, let me read these super chats, then we'll get into the last couple callers and then go to the final word here. Okay, let's see. Insurgent Honor, I got that one. Anonymous says Adam is confusing Jesus with Satan/Baphomet. I think
how.
Well, that was it there with the super chat.
Yeah.
Mike AF says he is going to quote mine you to death and act like he cares about what he is saying when he holds our faith in bitter contempt. He is not open to learning anything if he didn't have the humility to learn anything from our theology robot Pinesap. Then he says, who the fuck is this nigga trying to get his soundbite for his Gumroad paywalled audience? What are you, a Jewish NJP? Which would be wild. Stripe says, the Catholic Church is the continuation of the Torah, not rabbinic Judaism. This is not hard. Cookie said that. Hot dogs for sale says 6 million though? ? I don't really want to get into that. That's kind of a separate topic. Just let me go to these callers. Big Nick Show's been waiting for a while. Big Nick Show, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I'm losing my voice right now. I'm gonna make this quick. I had a couple things I was gonna say, but I think Spexo really finished him off for you. So I just wanted to say I love Pinesap. He's like my best friend, and good job, honestly. I came in and just total Catholic W. I did want to thank Adam Green actually. Adam Green's Reddit your arguments I believe has converted more people to Christianity than any missionary ever alive. And apparently I've gotten word that there is actually a warrant out for the arrest of Pinesap for the total murder of Adam Green. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And your voice, drink some
I'm sorry,
lemon tea or something.
I'm like dying all day.
I can tell. It sounds, yeah, let it rest. Thank you. I appreciate you calling in, though. You got it in anyway. All right. Let's see.
Does it make you guys feel better just to repeat, Pinesap won, W for Beardson, WWW, you lost, Christ is king. You guys seem like it's just pathetic copes just repeating this to yourselves in your echo chamber. It's comes off as really sad to me and pathetic.
All right, now
I do like Pinesap though, and love Ralph obviously.
Well, I appreciate that. I think we've had a good night. Of course, we knew the callers would be like this, but go ahead.
Well, I did want to say, like, me and Adam had a lot of really good moments during our discussion. It was kind of funny when we were talking about cross references and like we got tripped up on the definition. Like I had to smile at that. That was so just like wholesome and funny.
All right, now JPEG, you're the last caller. Unmute yourself.
Hey, thank you first of all for having the incredibly brilliant Pinesap on to absolutely dominate the feminine Adam Green.
Well, I'm the moderator. I don't take positions on winners, but go ahead with your call. I appreciate you calling in.
All these guys that want to claim victory, but I don't.
Here it is.
Like, he was right about
feminine.
this. Adam
You guys are coping. Stop.
Right, no reputations, no substance. Just we won. Keep repeating that to yourselves.
All right, JPEG, do you have a question? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So this gets back to the Spanish Inquisition because Pinesap, this was one of his best points, was he brought up the history of the Catholic Church and Jewish conflict between the two. And obviously the example that was used was the Spanish Inquisition. And you sort of just, dodged this question by just giving this blanket statement, well, that was used to allow the Jews to say they were the victims. So my question would be, what evidence is that was the reason for that?
Say that again?
Yeah, so your claim was that, like the Spanish Inquisition, for example, was done by the Jews through the Catholics to give the Jews basically this victim narrative in the future. So my question is, what evidence is there for that?
Well, the Gospels that say they're the synagogue of Satan and the enemy of humanity and that they killed Jesus, they're responsible for the death of Jesus. That was the built-in thing that led to persecution throughout history, the Spanish Inquisition being part of that. So once the religion was off and the ball was rolling, like they don't have control over every facet of what the relationship between Christianity and Judaism 1,500 years later in the Spanish Inquisition. But yes, they definitely do always bring up the Spanish Inquisition to smear Christianity, to make Christianity look evil and depraved, and to bolster up their victim status. They definitely have done that. Do you not see their weaponized victim status? Museums all over the world, we're not allowed to criticize them because it's the oldest hatred and everybody's hated them since the beginning of time, and they blame Christianity for the root of this hatred. You don't see how that plays into their dynamic of being chosen to be hated by the Gentiles. Esau hates Jacob, all these things.
No, I understand they do that, but you just didn't even try to provide any evidence as to how that's like a coherent idea that the Jews had fooled the Catholic Church into, attacking. By the way, it was heretics, not even just Jews. So that's already a discrepancy you'd have to address. You didn't even try to provide how the Jews controlled the Catholic Church into doing that.
I didn't say that the Spanish Inquisition was like a specific example of Jews controlling it behind the scene to persecute themselves. I'm saying that was an effect of just the Christian gospel that started 1,500 years before.
Okay, so then the Catholic Church is just the natural enemy of Judaism. Then that'd be the only logical explanation. But
they've been the main opposition to Judaism, but it's an opposition that believes worships the God and believes in their covenant and worships the Torah Messiah that was meant to conquer them all along. Why does this go over your guys' head so much? Their goal was to have the nations worship their God, and Christianity, they accomplished that through Christianity. How can you not just concede, yeah, that happened? You have to concede it and just say, yeah, it's a good thing. It's God's plan. He wants the Jewish king to rule over all the world.
Yeah, well, one, it's not the Jewish king. God is the king of everybody, which is why Christ died for everyone's sins, which you coincidentally and conveniently leave that out throughout this entire debate.
Hold on.
But once again, you're just not addressing the actual point, which is on one end, you say that Christianity was a Jewish invention to trick the Goyim. Then on the other end, it's having your cake and eating it too. You cannot ignore the fact that, historically speaking, Christians, specifically Catholics, and Jews have historically been enemies. It seems like you don't have an actual way to explain it, so you just go to these things, basically these abstractions.
I don't explain it. I've done video after video showing rabbis talk about their perspective on this and then show the reality of what all the scholars say about this. Christians fell into a trap of hating them for the wrong reason that turned Christians into the villains. That's why they have so much power today. That's why in Christian Western countries, they're passing laws that you can't credit, that anti-Semitism is illegal, because of this history from Christian anti-Semitism.
All right, Pinesap, hold on one sec. Pinesap, say something so I can pin you back to the screen.
Hey, Ralph, what's up? Sorry, I accidentally pressed the X button.
That's okay.
I wasn't trying to leave.
That's okay. We got you back on. All right, go ahead, caller.
He's running scared.
Go ahead, caller.
Rage quit.
Give your final take here, caller. I appreciate you being so fiery and coming in ready to go.
Yeah, so, I mean, this whole answer is a non-answer functionally, right? Because what you're saying is, on one end, you're trying to claim that the Jews made up Christianity to control the Goyim, but then on the other end, when the Christians are not being controlled by the Jews, and the Catholics specifically are combating the Jews, you just explained that away by saying, well, they can't just control the religion. So what they did is somehow they must have magically fooled the Catholics into, with their superpowers, apparently, into tricking the Catholics into giving the Jews event in the future.
Manipulation and religious,
they can see the future too.
Religious warfare.
All right, go ahead. Respond to that if you want, caller, and then I'll let him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already kind of been addressed. I mean, it's just obfuscations and not actually addressing the point because it's incoherent by its very nature.
Look at this. Beardson in the chat says, "Oh, the Jews are playing 4D chess, and they're just so much smarter than white people." Oh, they've never set up controlled opposition. Jews don't like to do that. They don't like to do 4D chess on anybody. You're right. I see you guys as like basically Jewish apologists and conspiracy deniers. The conspiracy is right on the pages of the Old and New Testament. You can see it. You want to see another example? I have a great example I want to show before we wrap up.
Yes, thank you, caller, by the way. I appreciate you.
Yeah, have a good night. And, Adam, I'll be praying for your conversion. You know, you're a child of God at the end of the day. We want you to come home. You guys know how
condescending? This is not like a own to say, I'm praying for your conversion. Nobody thinks you're
It's not an own. I'm being genuine here. I want you to know that we love you and we want you to come home. It's not meant to be an own.
Lie.
All right.
Why does that make you so angry that people care about you and don't want you to burn in hell?
I'm not scared of the Jewish boogeyman. I'm not scared of the penalty of not worshiping the God of Israel. It doesn't scare me at all.
He is much more than the God of Israel. I can assure you that he is much more than that.
Caller, thank you.
All right.
Have a good night, man.
I appreciate you too. Have a good night. Now go ahead, Adam. You wanted to show something.
This will be my last screen share, and I appreciate Ralph for letting me do this. So another scripture that is fulfilled in John on the cross. Jesus, knowing that all these things were now accomplished, all these prophecies, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Like, imagine really believing this actually happened. Jesus on the cross goes, oh, what other prophecies do I need to fulfill? What other boxes do I need to check off to prove that the Jewish prophecies are real? So what does he say? I thirst. So they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall. And where did they get that from? Prophecy from Psalms, once again, 69. They put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst. And then right after that, may the table set before them, the Christians, become a snare may it become retribution and a trap. So the very verse, the next line, fulfilling the prophecy of Jesus drinking the gall, trying to fulfill the scriptures, says, may the table, which I interpret as Christianity, is a snare, a conspiracy, a deception, a controlled opposition, and a trap. That's what Christianity is. A snare. A snare, they always liken to worshiping other gods as a snare. They've snared the pagans into worshiping the Messiah of the Jews, which was always the plan.
All right, now a couple super chats here. Anonymous says, Adam, why do you get so angry that people believe in God? I don't think I asked you that one.
I'm angry because I'm trying to liberate people from a Jewish spell. I'm trying to wake them up, and they want to bury their head in their sand. They want to stay in denial. It's easier to fool somebody than convince them they've been fooled. And I'm trying to free my fellow goy from this Jewish lie and these Jewish fairy tales. That's why I get frustrated. And to have Christians that call themselves spiritual Jews, the real Israel, worshiping the God of Israel, the King of the Jews, and then they call me a Jew because I don't believe any of that stuff. That gets old, that gets frustrating, and it's stupid.
All right, now let's see next super chat. Bob H says, Adam presupposes that the New Testament is a forged creation of Jews and then reads all history in light of that. What's his reasoning for presupposing the Bible and Christianity is false?
It's false. The New Testament's false because it's based on the Old Testament, which is clearly nonsense of Noah's Ark and serpents in the garden with Adam and Eve and, Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. Things like that don't happen. They're obvious fictions. These are obvious fairy tales, obvious mythologies. And Christianity is based on this. So if the Old Testament's not real, the New Testament's not real. And it's clearly not real because they're creating a new narrative from the scriptures of the Old Testament. They quote mined them and used them for inspiration in a Kabbalistic mishmash fan fiction that they sold to the Gentiles.
All right, one more. Mike AF says, Adam, your dog is starving. That bitch, which is not nice, but maybe it is a female dog. I don't know. Ain't gonna evolve food. Go feed it. Now, I'll let you.
I don't get it.
I don't either. I mean, I guess.
Why are they talking about my dog?
I don't know, because your dog was barking. I guess that was your dog. I'm not sure. Thank you. First off, I'm not sure if it was yours or his. There was a dog barking. I don't know whose dog it was. First off, I want to thank you for coming back on the Killstream. And I see another super chat in, kind of, wanting to save you or whatever. Kind of what we just talked about a moment ago. But I want to thank you for coming back on the Killstream and doing this debate. I think it was a big show. We had about 900 people watching just about all the way through. And so thanks to them as well. But I appreciate you stepping back onto the stage here and helping give us a good show and some good content. I'll let you lead it off since I let you start the first words. I'll let you start this one as well and give Pinesap the last word. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
I appreciate you for having me on once again, Ralph. I always enjoy these debates on the kill streams and always jump at the opportunity to try to teach the true gospel to all the groypers out there. And if anybody wants to see more, I only scratched the surface and gave like the very surface level details on this conspiracy. Go to my channel on Odyssey. There's a playlist, The Christian Deception Exposed. And I probably got like 20 or more videos there where I go into all the intricate details and really show irrefutably how this is a deception. And I appreciate Pinesap. I enjoyed the conversation. I think you're a good guy. And I encourage you to check into my videos more. I'd love to see if I'm wrong about anything. I want to hear legitimate responses because I'm not getting any good legitimate responses to the issues I'm bringing up.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Pinesap. The floor is yours.
Yeah, Adam, I'd love to check out your videos, man. I'll make sure to log on. I apologize that I hadn't checked out more. School was finishing up and stuff like that. I got graduation tomorrow, so I was a little.
It was short notice too. It was short.
Yeah,
notice.
It was. I kind of threw this together in like 4 or 5 days. So yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but this was awesome, and I mean, even though I may have seemed like frustrated or whatever during the debate, like I thought, Adam, you were very respectful and stuff like that. Thank you so much for being willing to talk with me, brother. And I want all of us at the end of the day to to just know how much Jesus loves every single one of us, you know, and I know that may sound corny. I know that may sound like, oh, you know, the Christian again, trying to get me to pass around, you know, Peter's pen so that, you know, Pope Francis can get a new, you know, crozier that's, you know, made in gold. But like,
don't love bomb me, bro.
Oh, what'd you say?
Don't love bomb me, bro.
Well, but I will say, man, like I do think that you have a heart that cares about truth, and I hope that if there's any restlessness in that heart, if you feel restless in your heart, that it may just one day be fulfilled in Jesus. And, you know, I think you're a good man, dude. And I'm glad that I got to talk to you. This was so awesome. So, yeah, God bless all of you guys. I really appreciate just tonight. It was awesome.
Very cool, and thank you for coming on as well. We couldn't have done it without you making your debut here, and I think everybody enjoyed the show. I know I did. Thank you to both gentlemen. A round of applause here. I think you might be able to hear that, hopefully. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Stay safe this weekend.
You too, man. Take care.
Very cool.
Thanks,
salute to you both. There we go. Adam Green and Pinesap.